Hey guys, tonight we slide into torchlit Alexandria, where the palace quarter rocks softly on the harbour and lamps turn corridors into slow streams of honeyed light. You breathe resin and sea salt, hear waves knock the quay like polite knuckles, and follow the hush of sandals as a night shift of attendants arranges itself for the Queen's passage. You probably won't survive this, by which I mean you probably won't survive staying awake through the tiny soothing rules that file every edge of the night until it's safe to sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and your local time. I love seeing that little constellation in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. If you forget, copy the cats. Step quietly, stare confidently at nothing, and act like you meant to be there. Light joke 1. If you knock over a jug, simply become a statue and wait to be catalogued. A soft mainstream fact tucks under your arm like a folded shawl. Cleopatra VII rules from 51 to 30 BCE, and her court is multilingual Greek for statecraft, Egyptian for ritual, anything else when diplomacy demands. Beyond the breakwater, the lighthouse of Pharos glows, proof that Alexandria loves to organize light. Inside, the Queen's male attendants organize shadow, making even darkness behave. A steward hands you a linen strip perfumed with kaifi, the temple blend that smells of wine and raisins and frankincense, and the back room of a well-read library. Hands are dabbed not for dirt alone but for omen. Clammy palms bad, cool palms good. A fringed tidbit slips by like a polite gecko. Those crescent wooden headrests you've seen in museums double as wig guardians, and mosquito deterrents elevate the skull, reduce the buzz. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's private apartment sat entirely on the little island of Antihodos, or extended onto the mainland keys. Earthquakes and the sea took their own tidy edit of the shoreline long ago. The debate doesn't trouble the night shift. Here the rod taps twice, and mouths belong to silence. Thrice, and a single answer may be offered. In Greek, trimmed like a well-cut garment, no loose words, no threads. You practice footwork in a side corridor polished by centuries of drifting feet. Ptolemaic marble likes to squeak at the worst moment. So, attendants learn the soft knee walk, heels a murmur, toes like careful fish. Never cross a painted lotus on the floor unless summoned. The flowers mark pressure lines, the invisible geometry of royal movement. Step over one unbidden, and you become the most interesting topic at the least enjoyable meeting. Light joke 2. On the bright side, you'll finally get a seat, just not the chair you hoped for. At a doorway guarded by statues, you practice eye lines. Looking at the Queen is not forbidden exactly. It's tiered, like theatre seating. Those closest keep their gaze lowered unless invited, both to avoid improvised staring contests and to spare the Queen the weight of constant attention. The rule knows something modern life forgets. Attention is heavy, you carry it like a water jar. Set it down gently unless asked to pour. Someone coughs in the distance. Etiquette for sound arrives like a helpful hand. Catch the cough in linen, rotate to a fresh fold, turn the fold inward on the next breath. Hygiene has choreography. Another mainstream fact, featherlight. Aromatic resins here are about more than perfume. Frankincense is spiritual housekeeping. The smoke standing in doorways like a bouncer checking vibes and sandals. Light joke 3. The smoke takes one look at your posture and waves you in. You clearly won't start trouble. You pause at shutters carved with ibises marching toward a lake that is probably the moon. Alexandria thrums beyond the copyists who refuse to sleep, the sailors arguing about whose rope is more rope-like. A bedtime statistic drifts in. Palace service runs on watches rather than hours, since water clocks sulk at night while sandglasses keep whispering. A cat hops onto the sill and gives the universal look of a creature who knows empires will pass, but fish will remain politically important. Another fringe note. Some attendants swear by tiny sachets of ground myrtle tucked into belts to discourage lice. Others trust smoke fans, flat paddles waved near the ankles to nudge away insects without smacking royal hems. Scientific? Debatable. Sleep-friendly? Absolutely. The point is to move slowly and breathe evenly so the room learns how to rest around a waking queen. The steward returns and tests you with a murmur. You answer in Greek, phrases clipped like freshly cut papyrus. He nods. A final, drowsy reminder settles in. The rules are not cages. They are lullabies for a space. They hush the air so a single voice can travel without force. Cleopatra will step into that hush and speak, and the words will go farther because the people and the floorboards have agreed to be quiet. The rod taps once more. Out on the harbour, metal clinks. You stand on your mark, eyes lowered to that tiny planet of marble near the Queen's gaze, and the night folds itself like linen ready for morning. You meet the palace the way a map meets a compass, by learning who stands closest to the needle and who keeps the edges from fraying. Rank here is measured in distance from the Queen, and in how many breaths you get to borrow from her silence. The chamberlains call them the keepers of rooms. The ones who tune air hold the innermost ring. They speak in low chords that tie one threshold to the next, and you learn their names the way you learn the lotus markers on the floor, by not stepping on them unless invited. One gestures you forward with 2 fingers and an eyelid's worth of movement. You remember the eyeline rule from the lantern-lit halls: look near, not at, and aim your gaze at the tiny moon of marble just before his sandals. Closest of all is the chief chamberlain, the one who arranges space around Cleopatra like a woven basket so nothing falls through. His job is less about doors and more about gravity. If he tilts a hand, lamp-bearers drift. If he clears a throat, water-bearers freeze, ice sculpted from humidity. Past him, secretaries haunt the doorway between privacy and state, parchment rustle poets who turn the Queen's breath into sentences. Their tablets smell faintly of resin, and the kefir you dabbed on your palms a while ago, remember those myrtle sachets for lice? The secretaries swear by cedar oil instead. They say it keeps moths and sloppy phrasing away. A mainstream fact anchors the scene. Ancient writers like Plutarch credit Cleopatra with speaking many tongues, Greek and Egyptian among them, which means her staff must be bilingual on cue, switching registers the way torchbearers shift a flame to avoid glare. You practice your syllables in a whisper, Greek clipped like good linen, Egyptian rounded like a reed boat's hull. The chamberlains nod, which in this palace counts as an ovation. Light joke 1. You take a bow so small it can only be seen by ants, who applaud politely and get back to union business. Behind the chamberlains, the steward corps fans out provisioners, roster keepers, men who make sure the right cup arrives at the right hand at the right temperature of just slightly warmer than gossip. They carry tally sticks notched with the number of trays in orbit, and keep a cord in their belts for pacing a trick you copy. The cord, marked at consistent spans, lets you measure corridors without counting steps allowed, which would ruin the mystique. Quirky tidbit for your pocket. Some stewards sent these cords lightly a dab of juniper for east, myrrh for west, so if a knot of servants gets turned around in a dim colonnade, they can literally follow their noses back to station. Torchbearers lampidarioi if you feel fancy patrol the middle distance. They hold fire at chest height, never above the brow, a continuity line of light that keeps faces readable but never interrogated. Their wicks are trimmed with a copper tool that tings once when the cut is clean. 2 tings means wax gossip, and 3 means someone get a new apprentice. They're the rhythm section of palace etiquette. If they stumble, everyone hears it, so they practice the soft knee walk until even the marble squeak learns manners. You imitate them and think of the cats in the corridor, those original faculty chairs of the library, padding judgment over your technique. Further out, door wardens align the palace's pulse. They track the pressure of bodies against exits, adjust cues with a knuckles tap on a staff, and place their feet precisely on either side of those painted lotus flowers you promised not to cross. Their staffs are wrapped near the top with thin, dyed linen that signals which door opens toward private apartments and which opens toward the public glare of an audience. When the linen is green, movement flows. When it's red, the threshold sustains a dignified traffic jam. Light joke 2. Somewhere there is a bureaucratic crocodile that dreams in red tape. You decide not to feed it. Outside the innermost rings, you meet the provisioning runners, those swift, quiet men who fetch scrolls from the library annex, sweeten wine from a cooled amphora, or ferry a message to the shipyards where the royal barge dozes between assignments. They wear hem lengths tuned to their speed, slightly shorter to keep knees free, darker weave to forgive the occasional collision with a puddle of star-wet floor. Their insignia are small stitched knots that tell a knowing eye which corridor each runner owns. You memorize 3 you'll need tonight and tuck the rest in the drawer of things future. You will absolutely learn just in time. On the periphery, but essential, are the guard detachment's bodyguards, who stand not as statues, but as finely calibrated furniture. Their presence says peace, while their eyes translate movement into probability. They coordinate with the chief chamberlain like a duet, one tuning risk, the other tuning calm. Historians still argue whether the Ptolemaic court relied on eunuchs in numbers like other Hellenistic and Near Eastern courts. What's clear in your present hallway is that roles are defined by function, and function by proximity, not merely by who was or wasn't eligible by anatomy. What matters is whether a man can hold a room so gently that it holds back. You drift past the scribal desk where incoming petitions stack like small, well-behaved waves. A scribe shows you how seals are noted in a register B. Hawk. Palm leaf, so later a secretary can match document to sender with the speed of a good joke. You don't touch the wax. You already learned the first rule of not being yelled at. Be the breeze that moves the flame, not the gust that makes it perform. Light joke 3. You briefly consider inventing a new department, Ministry of Gusts, and decide it already exists and works in accounting. The kitchen's forward team is its own tiny court, governed by the high taster and his deputy, who owns the quietest cough in Egypt. They send dishes into the orbit of closeness, calibrated by diet and mood. Lighter broths inward on humid nights, thicker stews when sea winds get feisty. You memorize the choreography for cup presentation, left hand under, right hand steady, rim turned slightly away until acknowledged. If the queen declines, you reverse the angle and back your steps like the moon retreating behind a cloud. Your feet remember the soft knee walk. The marble remembers to say nothing. Another fact floats in, calm and sure. The Ptolemaic administration layers Greek civic structures atop Egyptian religious offices. So, palace staff often coordinate with temple calendars and omen lists, the kind that tell you which hours are unlucky for contracts and perfect for haircuts. The steward shows you a slate with those hours marked in little stars and scowling fish, a system so adorable you forgive destiny for being complicated. You scribble a mental note to keep the unlucky hours away from lamp inspections and your own amateur attempts at poor timing. The outer ring holds the messengers and harbour liaisons, men who read wind as easily as you read a corridor chord. When the lighthouse beam swings, they count the interval, log the weather on ostraca, those pottery shards that double as notebooks and carry news into the palace on sand-dry sandals. Their rule is simple and hard. Arrive without being noticed, depart without leaving a draft. They adjust their pace to the torchbearer's light, the way a boatman matches oars to a swell, and the whole palace moves like a single animal that has decided to be smooth tonight. Between all these rings, the glue is training. The chief chamberlain doesn't shout, he edits. He trims words, polishes gestures, replaces a clumsy pause with a respectful breath. You feel yourself becoming a softer kind of precise, the sort of precise that lets someone else be brilliant. You think of the smoke fans and sachets, the quiet techniques that make a room feel freshly washed even at midnight, and understand why the rules live in bodies. Any papyrus can burn. But memory walks on feet and practices at dusk. There is one more ring you almost miss, the repairers. They carry wax, thread, a tiny chisel, and the authority to fix a snagged hem mid-procession or silence a squeaky hinge with a sigh of oil. If they do their jobs, nobody knows they exist. You decide they are your personal patron saints. Around you, the hierarchy hums as gentle as that fan you turned on at home. Cats glide past like endorsements. The chamberlain looks your way, not your eyes, your air and nods. In this palace, approval is a small shared temperature change. You stand where you belong, a measured distance from royalty, and feel the rules settle like linen the light, the cool kind that smells faintly of frankincense and the sea. Before the city yawns toward dawn, you report to water and light. The corridor curls you into a tiled alcove where the palace keeps its quiet river basins that refill from clay pipes. Pitchers that have learned to be patient, towels folded like obedient clouds. The lamp-bearer holds his flame at chest height, remember that rule. So inspection shadows fall kindly, not cruelly. You've learned that in this palace cleanliness isn't decoration, it's a password. The first syllable is water, the second is scent, and the third is linen that refuses to gossip. You start with a rinse that tastes faintly of stone and last night's cool. Sand clings to your ankles, the harbour's autograph, so you loosen it with a pinch of natron. That chalky soda salt Egyptians have trusted since the Nile learned to write margins on its flood. A mainstream fact pads in like a palace cat. Natron was a household staple here, used for washing, medicine, mummification, and scrubbing away the day. You make a paste in your palm and teach your skin a quieter squeak. It listens. Shaving is next, and the rules are blunt as a new razor. Absolutely no stubble at the jaw if you're working within 2 rooms of the queen. Priests in Egypt shave their entire bodies for purity in temple service. And you're not a priest, but proximity borrows standards like a cousin borrowing sandals. A steward sets down a bronze razor honed on a leather strap and a curved pumice stone smooth as a river pebble. You wet the blade with oil, the steward swears by moringa. Your face swears by, "Less pressure, please," and trace careful half-moons under the lamp's forgiving light. Light joke 1. If you nick yourself, remember the palace stance, become a statue and wait to be catalogued. Conservators hate drama. Coal sits nearby in a little pot, the colour of dignified fog. No, you won't paint a cat eye, that's not tonight's costume. But a whisper of coal along the inner rim cuts the glare from alabaster lanterns, the ancient equivalent of blue light glasses. A fringed tidbit pads up with soft pores. Some recipes for coal included lead salts that, in tiny, controlled amounts, may have spurred a mild immune response, less fashion, more pharmacy. Your eyes feel steadier, less tempted to blink at the worst moment, like when a cup meets a royal hand and marble is listening. The inspection of scent is not about smelling strong, it's about smelling settled. You dab the kaifi again, remember that raisin wine library blend, and then switch to lighter notes for the final pass. Lotus if the night is heavy, myrtle if you'll work near scrolls, cedar if the sea breeze turns nosy. You avoid cinnamon, it thinks it's the star of every scene. The steward lifts a thin cedar spatula to test the air at your collarbone, the way a tea master tests steam. He nods, which, as you've learned, is the warmest weather this palace offers. Headgear is a small ceremony. You've got your own hair, cropped obediently to keep sweat from inventing new languages, and a wig cap linen, soft, snug, that keeps stray hairs from hitchhiking into the Queen's orbit. On feast days, some men wear light wigs for uniformity, stitched with human hair and tinted with henna that remembered the sun longer than it should. Historians still argue whether those perfumed wax cones you see in banquet paintings were real everyday objects or symbolic perfume halos. If they were real, they definitely don't belong near scrolls, cats, or anyone who likes their shoulders unslick. You picture a cone gently sliding down your temple mid-bow and decide history can keep its mysteries. Hands matter. You scrub the nails with a reed brush and natron paste until they look like reliable punctuation. Then comes the finger test. Rub thumb to forefinger. If it squeaks like clean marble, you pass. The steward checks wrists for stray oil. Too much and a scroll will wear your signature forever. You take the myrtle sachet you tucked at your belt back in the lantern halls, remember? And refresh it with 3 crushed leaves. The smell is green and awake, like advice that arrived on time. Linen waits on a smooth bench in strict ranks. Under tunic, over tunic, sash, and a short mantle approved for your corridor. Colours are not fashion statements, they're access keys. Tonight you're cleared for inner antechamber and service hall, so it's undyed linen with a pale blue selvage, just enough colour to tell a door warden that your feet won't trespass a lotus line. The cloth is fine woven, count the threads, and your eyes might get drowsy on purpose, and the hem is stitched with the smallest knots your grandmother would brag about in the market. Light joke 2. If you ever fall asleep on duty, blame the hem's lullaby. Works once, fails twice. There's a ritual for putting linen on that prevents the dreaded twist. You lift the undertunic like a careful wave, step into it rather than over it. Stepping over fabric invites trip-friendly spirits, then smooth downward with flat palms. The overtunic follows, layered so seams face away from the Queen's likely line of sight. You tie the sash with a double wrap and a hidden tuck. Loose ends are for poetry and cats. The inspection wand, a polished rod with a copper tip, checks 3 points: shoulder seam symmetry, sash knot flatness, and mantle hang no angles sharp enough to stab conversation. Feet are cleaned again, lighter now, and dusted with powdered natron to keep them from squeaking. Sandal straps get a tiny dab of beeswax where they chafe. Toenails remain short and diplomatic. You remember the soft knee walk from the hierarchy tour, and promise your feet you'll be kind to them, even when the marble tries its favourite trick, surprising you with a hidden note, like a glass harmonica practicing scales. Now the absolutely not glamorous but deeply beloved segment, pest control. The smoke fans return flat paddles that you move with slow, steady strokes to herd mosquitoes toward doorways and out into the social life they deserve. You sweep under benches, along hems, and this is crucial near the painted lotuses. No insect should make you step over those without invitation. A steward adds a pinch of juniper to a small brazier. The smoke smells like a mountain thinking about singing. Another fact drifts in. Egyptian houses often burned aromatic resins not only for pleasure but also to freshen air and, in belief, and sometimes in fact, discourage pests. The palace simply writes the rule in frankincense. A quick dental pass belongs here, yes, really. You chew a twig of sumac, the fibrous toothbrush that tastes like a cross between mint and reasonable advice. Fibers splay, plaque retreats, and your breath joins the prolinen lobby. You rinse with watered wine, call it antiseptic, with flair and promise your future self. Fewer honeyed figs, more dates. Light joke 3. A messenger claims dates improve memory. You forget where you heard that. All the while, etiquette shadows you. No words unless necessary. And then in Greek, clipped as newly cut papyrus. If you must sneeze, life happens. You turn to the cloth and let the sneeze fly into linen exile, then swap to a fresh fold. The lamp-bearer watches your movements, measuring calm. If your fingers tremble, you pause until they remember boredom. Boredom is the palace's favorite temperature. Last, the linen inspection parade. You and 3 other attendants stand in a gentle curve so nobody blocks the light. The chamberlain's eye traces seams, listens for the hush of properly brushed cloth, inhales the settled ribbon of kaifi that should smell like a quiet library married to a sensible orchard. He touches the edge of your mantle, not to test the weave, but to test how the room feels when you move. The room approves. Cats blink, which is the local equivalent of a standing ovation. You are now technically invisible, which is the highest compliment. If anyone describes you later, it will be as a temperature. The air felt cooler, and the cup arrived. You drink a mouthful of water, straighten the tiny stitched knot that marks your corridor, and feel the rules settle around you like fresh sheets. The dawn bells will nudge the harbour soon, and your sandals are ready to whisper to the marble. Remember the cord you carry for measuring distance? You tuck it at your belt, lightly scented at the east mark with juniper. If you get lost, your nose will find the way. If you stumble, the soft knee walk will forgive you. And if you forget why all this matters, think of what the rules do. They make a space where a single voice can glide without raising itself. In that hush, the Queen will speak, and your careful, cleaned, unspectacular presence will help the words travel. Clothes speak before you do, and the palace is fluent. Linen murmurs rank, hem length whispers access, and colour taps the shoulder of every door warden before you arrive. Your own tunic undyed, pale as moon-bathed sand with that thin blue selvage already taught you this language, but tonight you learn the dialects. The wardrobe court is a cool room with cedar racks and the clean hush of woven order. Bolts of cloth sit like patient geese. A tailor, with fingers that move as if he's threading water, sets 3 garments on a low table and points with his chin. In here, the hands do more for thread than for speech. You begin with colours, which are not about taste so much as traffic. Public antechamber service takes undyed or faint blue calm watercolours that keep a room unexcited. Inner corridor service admits darker bands, a thin madder red line at the hem if you're cleared for document trays, a narrow indigo stripe if you're on lamp patrol. Private study support 2 rooms in allows a broader band dyed with saffron or weld. Sunset tucked low so the eye doesn't climb. Royal family proximity adds a whisper of purple thread. Not the roaring Tyrian pool, but a tiny, almost shy twist enough to suggest importance without announcing it like a trumpet at nap time. Mainstream fact, drifting in on the loom. True Tyrian purple pressed from murex shells was astronomically costly across the Mediterranean world and widely associated with high status. The Ptolemies, heirs to Hellenistic tastes, I loved it in principle, even when their tailors kept it polite in practice. Hems do as much talking as colour. In bustle zones, longer hems are dangerous. The marble has a sense of humour, so runners and messengers wear a clean mid-calf fall that doesn't audition for comedy. Those who pour or present cups keep their hems just above the ankle to disguise small corrections of stance. Meanwhile, scribal aides around scrolls prefer a touch longer because stillness is their job, and drape telegraph stillness like a lullaby. You're taught the hem test. Step, pause, sway the fabric with a breath. Listen. If the cloth shushes the air like a good librarian, the length is right. If it rustles like rumour, it goes back to the needle. Light joke 1. Someone murmurs that rumour-coloured linen is discontinued. The cats pretend to check. Insignia are the palace's soft badges. Metal clinks would spoil the air, so information stitches itself into cloth. Stitched knots remember the runner's corridor marks. Scale up here into a small code. A square knot near the right shoulder for those who handle sealed letters. A figure 8 closer to the hip for logistics. A tiny lotus rosette at the mantle corner for attendants authorized to cross a single painted lotus line without waiting for a formal call. You're issued a pair of faience bead tabs, blue-green like shallow Nile, that thread onto your sash. 1 bead means inner antechamber allowed. 2 beads add study threshold support. They're humble, but door wardens read them the way sailors read weather. A fringe tidbit the tailor shares as he works. Some attendants sew a teeny eye of Horus charm inside the hem, where only the tailor knows good luck insurance against snags, spills, and the peculiar magnetic pull between royal robes and new wine. The garments themselves mix worlds because the palace is a Greek-Egyptian conversation that never stops. You handle a Greek-style kitten cut slim for ease in narrow halls, then a short Egyptian mantle that crosses left over right the same way you'll reverse it if a cup is declined. Over some shoulders, on festival days, a Hellenistic himation wraps like a cloud taught to fold. On ritual mornings, a strip of Egyptian linen with reed-woven patterning sits like a bookmark across the chest. Historians still argue whether the palace kept standardized livery akin to a state uniform, or whether styles flexed by duty, day, and donor wardrobes. You, being practical, decide that whatever allows cats, doors, and queens to agree is the operative standard. Badges for proximity come in textures too. Cloth that approaches royal space is beaten softer on purpose so it falls without sound. Tailors soak select pieces in a thin solution of lotus and fish glue, then sun the fabric to persuade pleats to remember their line. Yes, fish glue, the palace's least glamorous magician. Your mantle's edge carries a barely there reed pattern authority you can feel with a fingertip, but can't see from a distance. The chamberlain likes it that way. Power that whispers lasts longer than power that shouts. Light joke too. Power that sings is reserved for the kitchen on bread day. Shoes get their cue cards as well. Sandals for outer corridors have 2 straps and pragmatism. Inner service sandals add a heel tab that keeps them quiet when you reverse in that moon retreat trick you practiced. For certain rituals, you switch to soft-soled indoor sandals that make you feel like a thoughtful cloud. The leather is rubbed with a light beeswax lotus blend so it doesn't squeak at the tragic moment, say. The instant an envoy tries to overbow and the marble is listening, hungry. You study insignia for the lamps crew. A minute copper stitch shaped like a wick tip near the collar. Easily missed. Impossible to fake because the copper thread is issued in stingy lengths. For the water bearers, a diagonal bar of slightly thicker weave where the jug nestles against the chest so the fabric can shoulder the cool without showing damp. For the repairers, your quiet patron saints, a secret pocket stitched inside the sash. Precisely 2 fingers wide, capacious enough for wax, thread, and the sigh that fixes hinges. You pass a mirror-polished disc and see not your face but garments telling your evening's tasks back to you. An itinerary written in cloth. Colours carry omens too, because the palace reads the sky into its wardrobe. The unlucky hours slate the one with little stars, and scowling fish sits near a basket of sashes. On a night with grumpy stars, staff lean into calmer tones, more undyed, less indigo, hems that promise no surprises. During feast cycles, when the queen appears as Isis, her public theatre of piety attendants' sashes adopt a faint gold thread, recalling papyrus bloom, but only at the edge so the goddess can be the only headline. Another grounded fact unfurls as quiet as linen. Cleopatra cultivated imagery of Isis in official processions and cult contexts. Fusing dynastic politics with religious theatre, the wardrobe participates in that fusion by staging colour and texture like lighting cues. The tailor demonstrates the knotting of your new badge cord left wrap for inner rooms, right wrap for study service. The tug so small only the cord knows. He asks you for your corridor cord. The measuring one centered at the east with juniper and shows how to thread it under the sash, so the bead tabs sit above it. Door wardens see the beads first and know your distance. You practice the bow with the new weight at your waist. It's not heavy, but it's information, and information always weighs what it needs to. There's a rule about mending in motion that lives here too. If a hem catches and marble loves jokes repairers swoop, a pin fixes the day, and your insignia authorize them to touch the garment without 3 layers of permission. If your badge cord breaks, you report to the wardrobe immediately and adopt neutral linen status. Visible enough to be responsible, invisible enough not to invite questions. Light joke 3. Someone once tried to fake a 2-bead clearance with an olive pit, and great hopes. The cats wrote a poem about it. Your last lesson is how badgers retire for sleep. Nothing with copper thread rests folded at a crease. Copper has opinions. Linen breathes overnight, hung on pegs with small cedar spacers so the fabric dreams flat. Beads are counted like cups. 1 tab, 2, tray, 1 tab, 0, wait. You recite your tally to the tailor, who nods and logs it on an ostracon as casually as a fisherman listing stars. When you step out, the colour bands at your hem carry you like purling water. Door wardens glance, note, open in a way that feels like the corridor exhaling. A torchbearer adjusts his lamp to give your insignia a little moonlight to travel by. He knows you're cleared for the study's threshold. The marble keeps its jokes to itself for now. You think of the pest fan choreography, the myrtle sachet, the soft knee walk, and see how all the tiny pieces have joined hands. Dress codes here aren't cages, they're chorus notes. Worn by 100 practiced bodies, they hum the palace into a single sleepy song where one voice will soon be heard without strain. You pass a painted lotus. You do not cross it. The hem says so, the beads agree. And somewhere, in the careful dark, the rules grin like a cat and roll onto their back for a moment of unguarded peace. Your feet get promoted before your voice does. The palace trains you to talk with ankles, to edit sentences with knees, to bow at the commas and never at the random uppercase letters that startle a room. The floor is your first tutor. A steward chalks faint lines down a service corridor, one for the standard pace, shorter for queen in motion, longer for envoy approaching with a speech that could use fewer paragraphs. You walk each line until your steps remember without asking, toes finding the breath between stones, heels landing like well-behaved punctuation. When the marble tries a squeak, you soften your knees the way torchbearers taught you, and glide the sound away as if you're smoothing a wrinkled sheet. Bows have angles the way lyres have strings, and you practice them in a mirror-polished bronze disc that has seen more ambition than the harbour has fish. The first bow, acknowledge and flow is a gentle dip from the waist with a breath's pause, eyes lowered to that tiny moon of floor you memorized back in the lantern halls. The second, receive and withdraw, adds a half step back, like the tide doing manners. The third, rare, and not for casual use, takes the head lower, shoulders soft, a posture like gratitude deciding to sit down. Your shoulders never clench. Clenched shoulders make noise even when mouths don't. Light joke 1. Somewhere a cat writes this on a papyrus. Do not clench and signs it with a fish. Eye lines are delicate because attention weighs what it looks at. You don't stare at the queen. You orbit her with your gaze, focusing just ahead of her path, at the hand that will reach for the cup, at the shadow that might trip a hem. When she speaks to you, your eyes lift only enough to show you heard, not so much that you become a second son. If invited to meet her gaze, you do so steadily, briefly, as if the moment is a bird you're letting perch but not cage. Your eyelashes become diplomats. Blink too much and you look like a signal fire. Blink too little and you look like a statue that's bad at parties. Training makes a game of it. In an unused colonnade, the chamberlain sprinkles a thin trail of ground ochre. Your river. You must carry a cup along this winding ribbon without letting your toes leave the colour. A lamp-bearer paces beside you to test the look-near rule. He raises his light. You resist the instinct to glance at the glow and keep your eyes soft on the floor's quiet planet ahead. Another drill sets a painted dot at the far end of the hall, the star. You walk toward it while the chief chamberlain speaks from your left with questions designed to steal your eyes. You answer without looking, because the star is the queen's destination, not the chamberlain's curiosity. Light joke 2. He asks your favourite fish. You say, whichever feeds the cat least, and the cat awards you a scholarship. Mainstream fact for your pocket. Elaborate court etiquette, including bowing rituals and controlled approach distances, was a hallmark of Hellenistic courts, influenced by Achaemenid Persian models. Alexander flirted with proskynesis, that full prostration, to the great grumbling of Greek companions who preferred their dignity standing. In Cleopatra's time, the Ptolemaic court refines posture rather than demands prone devotion, but the architecture of deference remains. Historians still argue whether proskynesis in any full sense survived in Alexandria, or whether the Ptolemies had long since trimmed it to bows palatable to Greek elites. Your knees are grateful for the debate remaining mostly academic, because a court is choreography. You learn cues that never become words. If the queen turns slightly right, The water-bearer takes a half step left to let light fall across her wrist. If she pauses before a threshold, the door warden plants his staff in the not yet, angle a slanted, breathing pause rather than the open upright. You match these micro gestures with steps that talk. A forward weight shift to signal readiness, a heel kiss backward to show withdrawal, a sidelong glissade when an envoy suddenly generates 6 extra arms of enthusiasm. You practice with a reed tray loaded with fake cups baked clay bells that will tattle if they chime and make it to the end of the Ochre River with silence intact. The tray purrs with approval, or maybe that's the cat. The gaze rule extends to everyone. Foreign envoys arrive armoured in glances, used to being seen. The palace looks at their attendants, not at them. It reads the periphery to infer the centre. You watch the envoys' hands, their eyebrows, the corners of their mouths where impatience tries to leak. When one man flares at the nostril, you didn't know nostrils could be eloquent. You soften the space around him by adjusting your own pace so his eye lands on calm. The trick is not to steal attention, it's to lend focus to where the queen wants silence to gather. You rehearse one dangerous moment, crossing a painted lotus with permission. The door warden murmurs the soft, "Allow," and you step forward without haste, eyes still anchored to the floor's safe island. If you look up too soon, your body will follow your eyes, and the angle of your bow will sharpen like a badly timed trumpet. If you look too late, you risk colliding with a chair that doesn't forgive. The correct timing feels like finishing a sentence and letting the period land softly. Somewhere, the lamp-bearer nods. Your shadow behaves. Quirky tidbit from the training basket. To teach steadiness, the wardrobe court hands you a tiny amphora shard to balance on the back of your hand while you bow. The shard is painted with a minuscule ibis, who looks unimpressed. You bow through all 3 angles with the shard staying put. The ibis remains equally unimpressed, which is how you know you did well. A fact, like a well-folded cloak. Ptolemaic processions and audiences were theatre as politics, mixing Egyptian sacred presence with Greek civic display. Distance, angle, and gaze were stagecraft that told the crowd who mattered and how. Proximity could crown or unmake. Your rules keep the crown from shouting, keep the air from wrinkling. When the queen moves through the study, your feet ripple her silence across the marble so it arrives before her voice. Between drills, you return to the Ochre River and walk it once more, cup steady, eyes soft. The chamberlain erases the line with his sandal, a gesture that means you no longer need the river to behave. You will carry it inside. He brushes a bit of ochre from your hem, remember the tailor's reed pattern, and glances at your bead tabs. 2 blue-green glints. Inner antechamber, study threshold. Door wardens have already read them and adjusted their hands on their staffs to the angle that says, "We knew." Night leans. Somewhere a water clock mutters patience. You fix your gaze 3 steps ahead, the exact distance your feet will need to behave, and feel your shoulders release their last, tiny grip. Attention stops being effort and becomes a room temperature breeze. The palace exhales. The cat approves, which, in this building, counts as a royal decree. Words are doors here, and you learn which keys fit which locks. The palace speaks in layers, Koine Greek for business that must travel cleanly across harbours and courts. Egyptian, often the soft, everyday demotic for rites and household rhythms, where the gods feel like regulars, and silence for anything that belongs to breath rather than sound. You carry all 3 like cups on a tray, and practice not spilling. The chamberlain issues you a palm-sized wax tablet, the palace's favourite editing method, and a stylus with a blunt end for smoothing mistakes until they never happened. On one side you copy stock phrases in Greek, the quickest road for audiences and logistics, present and listening, at the threshold, by your leave. On the other, you copy the Egyptian equivalents you'll need when a temple singer appears at the door, or when household offerings borrow the corridor. You whisper both sets until they braid in your mouth without knots, the way your feet learn to braid steps along the Ochre River from training. Your rulebook for speaking turns out to be more about timing than vocabulary. When the queen reads, words are illegal unless summoned. When she moves, words must be short, low, and shaped to fit around lamplight without disturbing it. If an envoy addresses her in Greek, you stay there, unless she shifts to Egyptian for a ritual aside. If she tries a phrase in another tongue she loved languages, Plutarch insists you follow the register, not the novelty. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra spoke Latin fluently or preferred interpreters for Roman guests. Either way, your task is the same. Keep the air clear enough that chosen words can travel without tripping on you. Silence has grammar. You practice three kinds. The first is the holding silence, where you keep a sentence ready in your chest like a folded letter, available but unmailed. The second is the shielding silence, which absorbs a clumsy remark so it doesn't ricochet against marble and titles. The third is the threshold silence, which is so serious it might as well wear a badge. On the painted lotus line, mouths go to lintel mode, supportive, decorative, not load-bearing. Light joke 1. You briefly consider sewing a tiny zipper into your lip for thresholds. The tailor says zippers haven't been invented and offers thread instead. The steward runs drills with ostraka potsherds that double as index cards. He reads, "Envoy mispronounces your name, believes you're the wine." In Greek you answer, crisp and gentle, "I am the bearer, sir. The wine is wiser and will arrive." New shard, temple singer signals a hymn. You reply in Egyptian with the formula for withdrawing hands before a sacred refrain. Even your fingers learn a dialect, palms turning from service to stillness. A lamp bearer trims his wick until your volume sits exactly between useful and weather. If you stray toward speechy, he lowers the flame until your consonants start whispering common sense. There are forbidden categories, not just forbidden words. You never name a problem in the Queen's presence, unless you also carry its fix. You do not speculate about schedules in earshot of schedules. You avoid verbs that tug the room, rush, interrupt, announce, and prefer verbs that behave, assist, convey, await. The palace keeps a phrase book that works like oil on hinges. You memorize until the lines taste like plain water. Quirky tidbit the steward swears by. Some attendants rub a fingertip on a myrrh bead before speaking to remind themselves to slow down. The resin's tack barely grips the skin, and the tongue follows suit. Distance edits etiquette. From the doorway you use titles that fit the scene, the Queen, in Greek spaces. The one like Isis in ritual contexts because theatre is also language. Inside the study, if she asks for an opinion, you answer exactly one measured breath long and then give the air back. If you must say no, and safety sometimes requires it, you put the no inside a yes. Yes, if the floor is cleared, or yes, as the hour allows. Light joke 2. You practice saying no to a cat. The cat upgrades you to furniture with benefits. Cue words steer movement without pointing. Clear means make a space. Still means hold where you are without turning into furniture. You never shout. Shouting is a door left banging in the night. Instead, you lower your voice and the room leans toward it, trained by repetition to meet quiet halfway. A torchbearer demonstrates. He murmurs light, and somehow every lamp remembers its job a little brighter. You file the trick beside smoke fan choreography and myrtle sachets under the heading Room Temperature Management. The Chamberlain adds a mischievous exercise called the Unhelpful Poet. Someone, usually a bored guard with a hidden talent, begins reciting metaphors for the weather just as an envoy approaches. In Greek, you pivot with a neutral compliment. Your image is rich, and pose a short, clear question about seating that herds the words back into useful pasture. In Egyptian, you borrow a temple cadence that begins and ends with the same phrase, peace to the path. A verbal basket that carries the conversation without spilling. Light joke 3. Your first rescue attempt ends with seating the poet. Turns out that was the problem all along. A grounded fact pads in like a cat you've met before. Royal decrees here can appear in multiple scripts. Greek, Demotic, hieroglyphic, so temple, city, and court hear the same order in their own accent. Centuries later, the Rosetta Stone will make scholars giddy about that habit. But for you, it's simply Tuesday. The palace applies the same logic in miniature. Door wardens use Greek to move traffic. Temple liaisons brief in Egyptian when a procession borrows palace corridors. Scribes keep twin formulae, so a decision can step out into either world without changing its meaning. What you do not do is translate the Queen unless asked. Interpreting without command is like repouring wine that has already been poured. If a guest looks to you for help, you bow the smallest bow ants, applaud again, and wait for the chief secretary to nod. Only then do you render a phrase, concise and faithful, into the language that makes the guest feel hosted, not corrected. If you can't hear perfectly, you do not guess. You request the word again in Greek, which is the palace's way of asking the air to behave. Objects invite their own verbs. Scrolls prefer carry to take. Cups prefer present to give verbs that keep ownership where it belongs. Doors like open better than let through, because doors have pride and enjoy being the subject once a night. The repairer's lexicon is pure poetry. Hinges rest, wax listens, thread remembers. You borrow their metaphors to calm a nervous runner. The corridor remembers your feet. Walk, and it will be so. He believes you. And the marble, flattered, chooses not to squeak. Mainstream fact to keep near your tongue. Ptolemaic administration layered Greek civic machinery over Egyptian religious offices. So palace language mirrors bureaucracy, Greek for ledgers and embassies, Egyptian for offerings and omens, both together for the theatre of rule. Historians still argue whether a strict "don't look, don't speak first" law applied to every attendant or flexed by function and hour. In your watch, mood matters, but the scaffolding holds. You keep the look near habit from footwork. Let Greek carry public edges. Let Egyptian cradle sacred middles. And let silence carry anything delicate enough to bruise. Night deepens. You can feel languages settling into your hands as much as your tongue. Greek keeps your angles clean. Egyptian rounds your movements so they land like offerings rather than deliveries. Silence makes you useful. You catch yourself smoothing a too clever phrase off the wax before it escapes into the room, the stylus's blunt end a tiny hush stick. Somewhere, the lighthouse turns its patient face, and the harbour replies in one syllable you don't need to translate. A door warden glances at the blue-green beads on your sash, and nods at nothing in particular approval in this building's native dialect. You slide the wax tablet into the small pocket. The repairers insisted everyone should have clever saints, and breathe that cool ribbon of Kifi that has followed you since the lantern halls. The night holds its hush. Words wait like well-trained cats, present, elegant, and perfectly willing to nap until called. Your hands get their own school, and the curriculum is cups, scrolls, and the art of stopping exactly where the floor tells you to. The steward sets a reed tray before you loaded with practice objects. One sealed papyrus roll, one empty silver cup, one ceramic cup that enjoys drama, one tiny oil flask, and a bowl pretending to be soup with more confidence than liquid. Your fingers, scrubbed to their favourite squeak with natron, hover like cautious birds. The chamberlain nods toward your wrists. All service begins from there. Wrists relaxed, palms quiet, forearms turned just enough that tendons don't hum. Hands that shout make cups nervous. You learn the scroll first because words are heavier than wine if you drop them. The papyrus roll lives in the crook of your left hand, thumb light on the outer edge, never pinching the fibres. Papyrus remembers, which is a polite way of saying it tattles when mistreated. Your right hand supports from beneath as if carrying a sleeping cat, no fingers touching the seal. The seal is the Queen's whisper hardened in clay. You don't smudge a whisper. When the chief secretary takes it, you pivot your wrist so the bulla faces him, not the room. Ownership travels with eyes. Light joke 1. Once, a runner presented a seal to a potted palm. The palm accepted with dignity and has kept state secrets ever since. Mainstream fact to tuck under your sash. Papyrus, made from the pith of Cyperus papyrus, was Egypt's writing backbone. Reed pens, soot inks, and clay bully turned breath into orders. Alexandria, stuffed with scholars and copyists, knew a scroll's mood like sailors know wind. Here, a scroll gets treated like a cup that spills letters, and you learn to catch every drop. Cups next, because the room eventually wants to drink what it's listening to. Silver warms under fingers, so you hold it by the lower bowl with a barley grain's worth of pressure. Supporting the stem with a fold of linen, a square that lives forever ready, tucked under your sash, just left of the bead tabs. Ceramic misbehaves on slick trays. The palace answer is a whisper of beeswax rubbed lightly into a ring on the tray's surface. Grip without stick, a secret pact between clay and reed. Quirky tidbit. Old hands will swipe a fingertip over a myrrh bead before presenting a cup. The same trick you learned for speaking, because that tiny tack slows a fussy hand just enough to look serene. The angle of presentation matters, and so does horizon. You offer the rim turned slightly away until acknowledged, then rotate wrist, not elbow, so the drink faces the taker like a moon deciding to be full. If declined, you reverse the turn and back your steps, as if the tide remembered etiquette. You keep the cup at sternum height, so the lamplight catches without making it perform. Too high and you glare the room. Too low and you force a bend that invites spilled politics. The water-bearer times his pour by breath, 2 heartbeats between stream and still to avoid the silver chiming twice. Remember the Ochre River from footwork drills? Imagine your pour glides along it. You rehearse the way flavors have weather. Mariotic wine, Alexandria's local pride from vineyards near Lake Mariout, likes to arrive a shade cooler than speech on humid nights, warmer than eyebrows on windy ones. This is not poetry, it's policy. The kitchen team manages amphorae in cooled alcoves like they're negotiating treaties. You just carry the treaty so it doesn't slosh into scandal. Light joke 2. If an envoy asks whether the wine is mariotic or magic, answer, yes, and adjust the candle so it flatters both. Thresholds supervise all of this. Painted lotuses mark zones like polite fences you don't climb without invitation. You stop with toes a reed's width before the flower, left foot to whisper back, body aligned to face along the corridor rather than into the room. Angle says, present, not invade. Your tray aligns with your sternum as if the lilies are testing your horizon. When the door warden murmurs the soft, allow, you step, eyes still trained to that quiet planet on the floor, 3 paces ahead. Cross, present, and retreat to let the lotus recover from hosting your feet. If a cat is lounging on the lotus, this happens more than law books admit. You defer to the cat. The warden will relocate the sovereignty with a respectful sound like a cough wearing silk. Scroll choreography meets thresholds with extra grammar. Some seals are door brittle. They travel no farther than the antechamber. You stop at the lotus, angle the seal toward the secretary, and hold your breath while he lifts the roll away from the air as if smoke might burn meaning. Historians still argue whether certain categories of petition could cross into private apartments sealed, or whether all clay was cracked at the study threshold to keep rooms from digesting secrets. You practice both versions, the solemn handover at the line and the quiet crossing with permission, your wrist steady as a lamp flame under a patient hand. The repairers, those saintly ghosts, teach you the rescue grips. If a cup slides, you drop your thumb a barley's width and let the beeswax ring remind everyone to behave. If the tray hums, you rebalance weight toward the hand nearest the doorframe so the sound runs into wood instead of air. If a scroll's edge catches on a sash tassel, the palace adores hazard in miniature. You freeze, become a statue, and breathe once while a repairer's pin edits the world. The pin is always 2 fingers wide, because pockets were designed by people who fix things. There's a drill called the corridor supper that makes you better at this than you want to be. The kitchen sends out 3 courses of practice. A bowl with light broth that sloshes at any sigh, a plate of dates that roll with ambition, and an oil flask with a cork that forgets it's a cork. You carry them along a path of lamps whose light rises and falls as if a breeze is gossiping. You must stop exactly at the lotus mark, present, and reverse without making a single clink, splash, or date escape. The chamberlain watches in his polished disc and pretends to be interested in architecture. The cat is less polite about staring. A mainstream anchor slips into the tray. Egyptians brewed beer as daily comfort and offering bread and beer economy, but Hellenistic courts also celebrated regional wines. Mariotic among them, so the palace knows both barley and grape by first name. Cups change with content. Beer prefers a broader mouth and privacy, wine likes ceremony and lamps. Your hands learn both dialects, and the threshold teaches where each belongs. Nobody tells you, but you notice. The door warden's staff wraps green for flow, red for dignified traffic jam. Also cue your tray to adjust. Green, you keep the cup a breath lower, so sightlines pass cleanly over. Red, you hold higher to signal patience without turning into furniture. These are the small conversations that make a room feel inevitable. Historians still argue whether attendants in Ptolemaic palaces used personal napkins akin to the later Roman mappa, or relied on shared service cloths and sleeve folds. Your sleeve fold was starched by a tailor who muttered fish glue poetry, so you're confident either way. You use the fold to catch a rebellious drip before it rehearses an inscription across the marble. The drip, chastened, returns to bowlhood. At the end, the chamberlain tests you with 3 calamities in sequence. A wobbly envoy who believes thresholds are suggestions, a secretary who reaches before you angle the seal, and a lamp that flares just as you rotate a cup. You breathe, slow, coal remembering its job, wrist turning so the cup's moon stays friendly, feet finding the simple geometry of lotus and line. The envoy is redirected without finding out. The seal meets eyes, not air. The lamp agrees to stop performing. Light joke 3. Somewhere in the shadows the cat takes credit. You allow it. Kingdoms have been built on less. When the tray returns to the sideboard, your hands hum a little, like reeds after wind. The chamberlain doesn't clap. He breathes an approving half-degree warmer. That is applause here. You count your beads, 2 blue-green glints. Still yours hang the service cloth to dream flat and thank the invisible pact between beeswax, linen, and the floor's patience. The night pulls its cool sheet a fraction higher. You have learned to carry objects the way the palace carries sound. Steady, deliberate, unremarkable, in the way that makes everything else seem remarkable. From now on, when someone says present, you will hear the verb the room prefers. Night is the palace's second language, and you learn its grammar by keeping watch when most of Alexandria surrenders to the soft tyranny of pillows. The lighthouse of Pharos throws its revolving thought across the harbour, and the beam brushes the palace roofs like a father patting a city to sleep. Inside, day rules go to low power, and night rules bloom quieter, narrower, ruthlessly kind to silence. You report to the night steward, whose voice is the colour of wool, and receive 2 things. A token cut from polished faience moonpale, stamped with a tiny lotus, and a vow that fits in your mouth like cool water. The token is not jewellery, it's your passport to hush. Each watch gets a colour shift under lamplight. Yours flickers sea green, which tells door wardens you are cleared to cross one inner lotus after curfew, if the chamberlain murmurs, "Allow." You thread the disc under your sash beside the blue-green beads, remember those clearance tabs from the wardrobe, and feel the new weight like a second heartbeat. The vow is simpler. You recite, softly, a formula in Greek that promises you will keep the Queen's business tighter than a cork in Mariotic weather, then a shorter line in Egyptian that promises the gods you mean it. You taste kaifi when you speak. The room approves. Mainstream fact drifts in, steady as a water clock. Courts across the Hellenistic world loved written oaths, tokens, and seals to police secrecy and duty, inheriting habits from earlier Near Eastern administrations, where clay, reeds, and promises enforced reality. Alexandria adds its own layer of theatre. A vow is a legal device and a mood, a way to tell marble how to stand. Night watch lives in zones. The first ring is corridors, lamps trimmed low, smoke fans resting like quiet paddles, pest bowls faintly perfuming the joints of doors. Your lamp-bearer partner works the wick with a copper trimmer, until the flame sits in a teacup of light, not a trumpet. You pace counts with a cord marked at regular spans. You scented east with juniper, back on grooming night, remember? Lay the cord across thresholds, so your patrol reads like lines of a poem, and move on. The second ring is exterior doors facing courtyards, where moonlight forgets how to mind its business. The third is storage scroll cabinets, coin rooms, the pantry that holds olives with political opinions. No watch is complete without the proverbially unhelpful rumour, which floats around night like a moth convinced it is a scholar. The steward drills you with scenarios on Ostraka. A dock clerk says the grain ships are late and the city will riot by noon. You answer with the only legal midnight verb log. You log who said what, when, and who else breathed near the sentence. You do not repeat. The rumour may be true, false, or a cat's attempt at narrative, but until dawn shifts the palace into larger gears, your job is to keep the room calm enough to detect which. Light joke 1. If a cat reports the rumour, you still log it. Cats have sources. Secrecy oaths come with choreography for mouths and feet. Mouths, no names in open corridors. Titles only. The way the day taught you the Queen, or the one like Isis, depending on the room's costume. Feet. A hold line, marked by a single painted papyrus, strand thinner than a lotus, easier to overlook. If you forget and cross, the corridor remembers, and so does the guard's ostracon ledger. You practice pausing with one toe on the papyrus, and one off. The world's smallest reminder that discretion is a step you choose not to take. The palace keeps a cabinet of cipher tokens, small bone and faience pieces notched with a pattern you and your partner memorize. They aren't grand codes, more like, yes, this is us, handshakes for night. 2 short notches and a long mean lamps trimmed, west passage clear. A single long notch alone means, we need the repairers. You pass a token under a door, like a respectful beetle. On the other side, a partner answers with its mate, quirky tidbit the steward swears by. Before a storm, the faience tokens feel cooler to the skin, maybe the air, maybe the gods, maybe the power of suggestion, so watchmen jokingly call them little weatherstones. You press yours to your wrist. It's cooler, and your wrist decides to be impressed. Some secrets are physical. The pantry at night is a negotiation with jars. You count amphorae by shadow height. Stoppers throw small hats on the wall. so you don't have to clink anything into consciousness. Coin chests sit under a layer of unremarkable linen that the repairers sewed to whisper. Brush it wrong, and it hisses a little, which is the palace's version of a finger to the lips. Scroll cupboards, where theatre masks in wood, literally carved faces that stare down over knowledge. And your key is not a key, but a sequence. Touch the lintel, breathe once, check the seal, read the buller aloud in a whisper, then open. Words calm hinges. Hinges love compliments. Night has sacred traffic. Temple liaisons arrive through side doors with offerings that need to cross palace space. Oil, bread. A small statue who prefers not to travel with daytime crowds. You switch from Greek to Egyptian without tripping, and your hands switch too, palms slightly up, fingers quiet. The posture that says, I am a shelf with a heart. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra kept nightly household rites in royal rooms, or reserved them for calendrical mornings. Your watch learns both scripts, a quiet hymn like a thin ribbon down the corridor, or a simple nod to a small altar that minds its own flame until dawn. Penalty is the word nobody says, but everybody polishes. The steward does not threaten. He points to the vow and the ledger, and lets imagination do the part. Intimidation ruins. Lashes exist. Fines exist. Demotion to the outer rings, the administrative equivalent of exiling a spoon to the bottom of a drawer, exists. And there is the oldest penalty of all. No longer being trusted. That one arrives without noise and sits next to you at breakfast, like a shadow that learned to eat. You run the discretion drill, which is a play the palace puts on for itself. An actor, usually a secretary bored with grammar, pretends to be an envoy's aide who just needs a tiny detail for the morning. He offers a coin the size of a date and a smile the size of Mariotis. You bow the smallest bow ants can see and say, in Greek, the phrase you memorized, the morning knows more than I do. If he presses, you escalate to ritual words an Egyptian night is keeping, which shuts the door without slamming it. If he persists again, you become furniture with opinions and fetch the steward. Light joke 2. The actor winks. You log the wink. The steward gives the wink a performance grade. Mainstream anchor, because night respects facts. The library and mousseon nearby were webs of scholars, cataloguers, and copyists under royal patronage. Ideas had protocols, shelves had rules, and the palace learned from that temper. Secrecy isn't only about danger. It's also about not letting half-cooked news set the sauce. Bread needs time. So does policy. The best tool of night is temperature. You keep the corridor cool, not cold, by adjusting shutters to the harbour breeze so voices don't carry the way heat loves to carry them. You watch the lamps drink oil at a measured pace too low and they sulk, too high and they perform. The smoke fans do their lazy ballet around ankles, directing mosquitoes toward windows and philosophical inquiry elsewhere. And you practice the hardest trick of all, standing so still that a talkative thought gets bored and leaves your head untouched. A patrol takes you past the painted lotus you crossed earlier with permission. You do not cross it now. The cat occupies the center like a star who refuses to learn lines. You give the cat your token as if you're stamping her passport. She yawns and accepts honorary clearance. Light joke 3. You consider logging the yawn as a weather event. Decide the meteorology jar is full. When the beam from Pharos swings and your shadow steps forward, you think of how many small oaths the night holds. The cedar spaces keeping garments from creasing, the reed pattern the tailor hid at your mantle's edge, the beeswax ring that holds cups to trays without calling attention to itself. All of them vows in cloth and habit. Your spoken promise joins them, a thread that disappears into linen and reappears as trust. Dawn will audit everything gently. For now, your token glows its sea-green promise. Your mouth remembers to be the place where rumors go to nap, and your steps count the palace into a softer kind of breathing. The vow sits behind your teeth, cool as stone, quiet as a cat on a lotus, stronger than gossip, and almost as old as love. Health in this palace is choreography too, only the music is quieter. You start your watch at the little infirmary tucked off a colonnade that smells like honeyed wine, warming oil, and the sort of linen that believes in second chances. The physicians Ayatroy, with hands that look like they've read a lot, have a rule for attendance near the queen. Be so clean that worry gets bored. You wash again at the basin you know by heart, natron turning your palms into the polite kind of marble, then step to the antidote chest like a librarian approaching a beloved dangerous book. The chest is a cabinet of temperaments. Drawers marked by tiny inked animals, ibis for fevers, scorpion for stings, fish for those nights when the sea remembers it is a god, hold wrapped packets sealed with clay. Your job is not to prescribe. Your job is to fetch without thinking loudly, to carry remedies like you carry cups, upright, calm, unremarkable. The chief physician shows you the protocol in Greek and repeats the key lines in Egyptian, so memory has more than one road. Announce the seal, check the ledger, unseal only where air won't eavesdrop. You practice, fingers steady. The beeswax tray ring from service drills, now a habit of mind, you keep everything at that small, obedient horizon. A mainstream fact arrives with the herbal steam. Alexandria's medical tradition, think Herophilus and Erasistratus, a couple centuries before made the city famous for anatomy and pharmacy, and Cleopatra's court inherits that seriousness. Ancient writers credit Cleopatra herself with a taste for pharmacology and cosmetics formulas. Whether she compounded or commissioned, the palace keeps recipes like state secrets. Historians still argue whether the Cleopatra's antidote, mentioned in later sources, an ambitious blend against poisons, ever existed outside rhetoric, or if it was a cousin of the more famous Mithridatium rewritten with Alexandrian flair. You don't weigh the debate, you weigh packets and let the clay seals have their say. Perfume here is medication that learned choreography. Kefi. You've met the raisin wine library ribbon that calms rooms. But there's also Mendesian oil that travels like a warm river, metopion with a peppery cleverness, and succinum, lily sweet and impossible to ignore. You learn the palace dosing. 1 drop for linen, never directly on skin that will approach papyrus. 2 drops for a humid night when mosquitoes read the invitation wrong. None at all on archive mornings. The perfumer tests a vial by painting a thin line on scrap linen and watching the halo. If it expands like gossip, it's too oily for corridors. Light joke 1. The perfumer calls that a busybody bloom. The cat pretends to take notes. Pest protocol takes a whole lesson because insects admire power and want to be near it. You already know smoke fans, the slow ankle ballet, but now you learn the blends. Juniper for casual evenings, myrrh when the harbour breeze brings feisty wings, a cautious pinch of cinnamon when the kitchen needs to smell like a memory without staging a coup. The brazier's flame must be the size of a quiet thought. Any bigger, and the lamps get jealous. You sweep with the fan in long, even strokes that hurt rather than swat, because nothing ruins an audience like a heroic slap at your own shin. The steward demonstrates the door drift, a technique that steers pests toward cracked shutters, where night will kindly adopt them. Lice are the bureaucracy you didn't ask for. Rules exist. Combs of fine-toothed wood live in a cedar box, cleaned with natron between shifts like tiny harps of hygiene. Wigs on feast days or uniform nights sleep on headrests you've already met, those crescent cradles that also keep mosquitoes guessing. The laundry court maintains a boiling rota for underlinens. Garments come back with reed tags that say which kettle and when, because steam is a kind of oath. Quirky tidbit the linen master confides. Attendants swear that a dab of crushed myrtle in a sash discourages small hitchhikers. Skeptics call it superstition, but it smells like competence and that's worth something. Your hands learn the pulse check that doesn't interrupt reading. 2 fingers at the wrist, yours, not the Queen's. You are practicing counting quietly with the water clock's mutter. You log in Greek, because numbers like straight roads, and mirror the note in Egyptian for the temple liaison who tracks festival fatigue. If the Queen coughs, there's a linen dance you already know. Catch, turn, fresh fold, and replace. The whole choreography designed so no one writes dramatic in the margin. Remember the coal trick you learned to tame glare? Physicians nod at it. Some recipes may have coaxed immune defenses, but they remind you not to melt it with tears of panic. Tears are for bards. Attendants prefer boredom. Oils have their etiquette. Moringa for shaving, yes, but keep it off cuffs that will meet scrolls. A thin balm of Balanos for chafed sandal straps spread with 2 fingers, so you don't re-sculpt your footprints on polished floors. Opobalsam, the cherished resin some swear is liquid. Sunrise is locked, logged, and used by physicians only. You smell it once, faintly, when a singer from the temple arrives with a cracked voice. The sound mends around the balm like cloth around a careful stitch. You admire the undrama of it. Light joke 2. You volunteer as a test subject. The physician says your voice is already sufficiently sleepy for palace purposes. Poisons live in stories more than in your hands, but your hands still learn their antidote choreography. If a dish tastes odd, you don't taste again. You let the taster speak the code 2 taps on the bowl's foot, and the whole tray retreats the way the moon withdraws from a cloud. You fetch the charcoal water and the honey jar without letting your eyebrows write the play. Somewhere, a ledger of hours and ingredients slants a little toward urgency. You keep your pace at reassuring. A fact returns like a familiar scent. Egyptian households used honey as medicine, an offering, wine as antiseptic, natron as purge and salve. The palace folds those basics into Hellenistic pharmacy, measured, logged, debated across 3 scripts if necessary, and hides them in plain sight. The honey you use to sweeten a guest's tea might also be the honey a physician asks you to fetch for a dressing. You begin to see the palace as one kit, and every corridor as a bandage that keeps air where it belongs. Historians still argue whether the queen died by asp bite, ointment, or needle slip different endings for the same drama of knowledge and control. The physicians don't perform that debate for you. They show you instead how to carry an antidote packet without cracking the clay, how to settle a room with a sentence that lands soft, how to tilt a lamp so a patient feels seen but not examined by the sun. You file the debate in your head next to lotus lines and bead tabs. Interesting. Ultimately less useful than the rule about never letting a rumour hold the tray. Mid-shift, the perfumer calls you to smell a fresh kefi, raisins and wine cooked down with frankincense until the air remembers kindness. You pass the brazier and give the smoke a slow fan, the ankle ballet you could now perform in your sleep. The scent curls around your wrists like bracelets that don't need to be seen. Light joke 3. You ask whether bracelets count as medical devices. The perfumer prescribes 2 whiffs and a nap. By morning, you've restocked the combs, logged the oils, counted the wrapped packets in the scorpion drawer, and washed your hands so often the marble in them has opinions. You adjust your sash so the blue-green beads still wink their quiet access, and you tuck the wax tablet into the repairer's pocket with a small sigh that heals hinges on the way. The cats make their rounds, serious as inspectors, then curl in the sunny square by the painted lotus you will not cross without permission. You think of how many unseen guardians keep the room safe. Smoke fans, sachets, ledger lines, headrests, and realize health is mostly this. Careful boredom performed exactly so that one voice can speak without interruption. When the first beam from Pharos pales against the new day, you breathe the last ribbon of kaifi and step back into the corridor that smells like linen ready to forgive. Your hands are steady, your sandals quiet, and the palace perfumed, pest-managed, antidote-ready inhales as one. Somewhere a physician writes a neat line in the ledger and underlines nothing at all. That, here, is the happiest prognosis. Audience days begin as geometry. The floor turns into a map you could read with your feet. Lotus lines, star dots for envoy holding zones, a faint ochre arc that predicts where lamplight should fall when the queen raises her hand to speak. You arrive before dawn, tray free for now, to help draw the air. Curtains are clipped back to their exact halfway tremble. Lamps are spaced, so every face is legible but none is auditioning for theatre. Your job is to make space look inevitable. When a room feels like it always wanted to be this shape, authority doesn't need to shout. The chief chamberlain walks the perimeter with a staff whose copper tip taps out the choreography. First ring. Door wardens rehearsing their 2 angles breathe and open until the sound alone could guide a blindfolded cat to the proper threshold. Second ring. Secretaries and interpreters setting up their whisper posts so language can change lanes without causing a pile-up. Third ring. Stewards who'll conduct traffic between courtyards, kitchens, and the cool, dignified corner where gifts take a number and compose themselves. You check your bead tabs, 2 blue-green glints for inner antechamber, and study threshold and feel their weight like permission humming. You lay out the queue lines chalk so faint only trained eyes salute, that keep envoys from drifting into intimacy by accident or enthusiasm. There's a narrow path that leads to the mark, where they will deliver their practiced phrases and present their practiced gifts. You'll tune their approach with nothing but pace and air. If someone surges forward, often the proud ones whose sandals have never learned to whisper you, simply arrive in their peripheral vision as calm as linen. People follow calm the way boats follow light. Light joke 1. If an envoy refuses to follow calm, you upgrade to calm with eyebrows. Works 9 times out of 10. On the 10th, the cat intervenes. Mainstream fact floats in with the dust motes. Hellenistic monarchies staged audiences as public theatre ceremonial entrances, controlled distances, choreographed silence, borrowing and remixing Near Eastern models, so kingship looked like a God's side project. In Alexandria, The Ptolemies layered Egyptian sacral presence onto Greek civic display, and Cleopatra's court perfected the blend. On audience days, the room is both temple and town square. Incense and receipts, lotus and ledger. You review the language stations. Interpreters stand in the cool shade of a column, Greek for diplomacy, Egyptian for ritual, and others hovering in the wings like understudies. Aramaic, a brave Latin. You've drilled the register rules. Switch only when cued, carry tone, not just meaning, and never make the queen sound like someone else. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra preferred to meet Roman envoys in Greek, or whether she occasionally played with Latin for effect. Your station solves the problem by preparing for both while speaking neither, until the secretary nods. The wax tablet sits in your repairer's pocket, ready to smooth a sentence that tries to escape its own grammar. Envoys arrive in costume silks, crested hair, a hat that believes in itself, and each costume carries its own weather. You study details the way a sailor studies wind. The angle of a clasp that says, impatient. The choice of lighter footwear that whispers, I plan to bow too far. The gift wrap to be opened rather than admired. The steward assigns you to the outer corridor to greet their attendants, the men who hold real logistics. You offer water at the I will not spill on marble temperature, and glance at their shoes. Dusty, they came in haste. Polished, they intend a lecture. Light joke 2. A messenger claims his boots are both dusty and polished. You congratulate him on being politically ambidextrous. The gift table is a whole novel. You inspect seals on amphorae, weigh small boxes with your palm, and log inscriptions in Greek, then mirror the note in Egyptian. A quirky tidbit from the gift clerk. Some cities send honey tinted with saffron to make it look like liquid dawn. He keeps a shard streaked with real dawn honey for comparison, and swears he can tell by the way the light gets shy inside it. If a gift needs to breathe perfumes, exotic woods, you station it where air kisses rather than courts it. If it needs to be looked at rather than inhaled fine textiles, you keep it far from lamps, because jealous light will try to own the room. Now comes the invisible portion, the one that keeps authority from fraying. Spacing. You stage the envoy party, so the queen's gaze can travel like a gentle oarstroke. No sudden pockets of question, no eddies of chatter. Those with petitions stand closer to interpreters. Those with tribute stand closer to the gift clerk. Those with theatre in mind stand closer to the lamp that forgives. You enforce no-go zones with nothing but posture, and that threshold silence you've mastered. Mouth a straight line, eyes soft, shoulders agreeing with the wall. People move, walls win. The queen enters without trumpet but with gravity. Lamps remember their height. Your feet remember the ochre river you practiced on. She stands on the mark, where the light makes her look like the point where sea spray decides to become a person. An envoy begins with a bow that travels a hair beyond the polite. You modulate the next approach with 3 beats of stillness, so the bow does not become a trend. The door warden plants his staff at the enough angle. The beam from Pharos forgets itself and blushes against plaster. A fact like a steady cup. Cleopatra cultivated Isis imagery in public ceremony crown, sistrum, the theatre of a living goddess, precisely to make rule feel like ritual. On such days, your cue lines adjust. Envoys are bows in a festival arch, not participants at a marketplace. You mark the floor with chalk that a passing broom will forgive, but a trained sandal won't miss. The sistrum shivers once. Everyone remembers their place in the music. Gifts approach, and you rehearse the choreography you learned with cups and seals. When a box is meant to be opened, you angle it toward the queen, and then withdraw your hands entirely so meaning is not tangled with your fingers. When a scroll is for public reading, you present it to the secretary, not the queen. Aggrandizing your role is how furniture gets demoted. If someone tries to speak from behind the lotus, you translate their intent into posture and stillness. A micro shake of the head you learned from cats, an almost smile that says, after. If the speaker insists, the rod of the door warden clears its throat. The rod never needs to raise its voice. Some days politics smells like wine. Mariotic arrives in small cups, remember the silver height rule? And the poor obeys the air. If the envoy has a prideful throat, you let the cup's moon turn a fraction slower so the room recognizes discretion. If that pride adds volume, you let the lamp beside him dim a feather. Light edits people. Light joke 3. A torchbearer murmurs that his wick has better diplomatic instincts than his cousin. You tell him not to say that near the wick. Your eyes live 3 steps ahead, scanning tray edges, reading shoulders, measuring whether the envoy's second sentence is migrating toward first-person singular too quickly. If it is, You shift your own stance to invite brevity, a trick the Chamberlain calls folding the air. It works more often than pride suspects. And when a phrase lands that needs answering, your silence makes the Queen's reply travel farther than volume could have. Security on audience days is felt, not performed. Guards are furniture with opinions. Their gaze is a glass wall everyone chooses not to walk into. The staff wraps green and red change to a thin gold thread at nightfall, not for display but for the hinge team. Gold means oil's checked, hinges good, expect company. You never look at guards to feel safe. You look at the floor lines you drew and feel them holding. When the last envoy bows correctly and the last gift is logged, the room exhales into logistics. Interpreters compare notes. You deliver the summary tablet to the ledger desk. Names, gifts, promises, a discreet mark by any sentence that smelled like ambition. The secretary copies the essentials in Greek and Demotic, practicing the same double-script diplomacy that will one day make scholars swoon over a stone in Rosetta. You stash your chalk, gather your wax tablet, and unclip the curtains to their rest height, the one that says, "The room remembers sunlight." He Deltadic. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's audience chamber stood on Antihodos Island or along the mainland quay, drowned by earthquakes after her reign. Wherever it stood, you made it stand today by teaching the air to behave. The cat hops onto the gift table, sits on the dawn honey shard like a magistrate, and purrs a verdict you accept as binding. You leave the chamber as you found it inevitable. Lamps sleep at the right height. Lotus paint still smiles under the pause that ignored it with dignity. Your bead tabs wink twice, small stars for small authority rightly used. Outside, the harbour's masts scribble a soft skyline, and Pharos keeps writing its one-letter word across the water. You walk the path you drew, feet remembering angles, and let the day fold behind you like good linen. Travel rewrites the rulebook in smaller handwriting. On the water, the palace shrinks into a flotilla of habits. Portable lotus lines painted onto rush mats. Door warden staffs wrapped with travel linen. Lamps tamed to wind instead of walls. You report before dawn to the royal barge, where the deck smells of wet rope, oiled wood, and the shy sweetness of lotus buds packed for luck. The chief chamberlain walks the planks like a man editing a moving sentence. "Everything still applies," he says, "only kinder." He means your steps, your voice, your tray, all of it softened to ride swells and seams. The barge has its own geography. Awnings make corridors, poles become thresholds, and a knotted line on deck is the travelling lotus you will not cross without the murmured "allow." Your blue-green beads, remember those clearance tabs earn you the inner shade near the Queen's reading couch, a cedar piece strapped to the deck so it doesn't try drama. Lamps convert to braziers with low domes. Flame height is measured against wind like a polite negotiation. The lamp team swaps copper trimmers for shell scoops, easier on a rocking floor, and the wick learns humility. Light joke 1. If the wick doesn't, the river explains humility directly, with notes of surprise and splash. A mainstream fact rides the current. Ancient writers Plutarch most famously describe Cleopatra's theatrical river entries, especially that scented sail arrival to meet Antony at Tarsus in 41 BCE, a floating stage with silver oars and purple canopy. The court you serve knows both the spectacle and the spreadsheet behind it, where the ropes coil, which way the wind forgets itself, who keeps the kaifi away from the sailcloth that gossips to sparks. Tonight is no parade, it's a transfer. Still, the etiquette carries a perfume of theatre. You stage water as if the harbour has seats. The tray rules adjust. Beeswax rings on reed trays get thicker rims because wood flexes with waves. The silver cups ride sternum high, but your horizon is now the boat's balance, not the marble's reflection. Pouring becomes a duet with the helmsman. He lifts a finger when the barge noses a swell, and you pause mid-tilt so wine doesn't decide it wants to be a sailor. Mariotic travels wrapped in damp cloth, cooled by baskets lowered briefly over the shady side river as cellar. The kitchen secures amphorae with knotted slings that the repairers invented clever saints, and you bless them under your breath every time the deck remembers to be a river. Scrolls travel differently too. Papyrus hates damp. You cradle rolls inside a waxed linen sleeve, bulla outward, and you never ever break a seal in open air. Reading moves into shade or below deck, where an oil lamp learns to purr instead of strut. You rotate the seal toward the secretary the way you practiced on land, wrist, not elbow, because elbows forget themselves at sea. The secretary logs in Greek numbers enjoy straight lines even on water and mirrors essentials in Egyptian, in case a temple courier meets you at a riverside shrine with a calendar request. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's celebrated Nile voyage with Caesar in 47 BCE ranged far upriver as later storytellers insist or stayed short and symbolic. Whichever route wins the argument, your job is the same. Keep letters dry and egos drier. Pest control at river speed is gentler. Smoke fans become palm plumes, their strokes timed to wind rather than walls, herding mosquitoes off the cool shade without baptizing the queen's hem. Juniper works, myrrh calms, cinnamon remains under supervision, sails remember everything. Quirky tidbit, the boat crew swears by. A tiny sachet of crushed mint tucked under the awning cord discourages flies at eye level, maybe the scent, maybe sailor superstition. But it smells like somebody already solved a problem, which is half of solving it. You add mint to your travelling myrtle and feel competent by osmosis. Roads are a different grammar. When the court moves overland litters, carts of gear, a chain of mules with an opinion about poetry dust becomes a colleague you treat with respect. You swap soft-soled inner sandals for road sandals with a heel tab that refuses to sing, then wrap your sash over the measuring cord. East still smells faintly of juniper. Good old habit. The lotus line becomes a painted stripe on a ground cloth at rest stops. You will not step past it even when a camel writes a persuasive memo with its knees. The door warden's staff wraps green and red translate into ribbon flags that flutter signal distances. Green for flow, red for dignified bottleneck, white for someone's cart believes it is a mountain. Light joke 2. The cart is not wrong, you flatter it into becoming a hill. Serving on the road requires a new wrist. Water is king. Cups are wider, cooler, and carried under awnings that breathe. You pour with the wind, not against, letting the breeze be your second hand. Oils ride in small skin flasks wrapped in felt. You keep moringa for shaving mishaps, balanos for straps, and a travel kefi cone that pretends to be modest and is not. Your sleeve fold starched long ago with fish glue poetry still catches rebellious drips before they diagram themselves on the Queen's travel cloak. Scrolls travel in leather cases slung across your chest, so you can hold steady when the ground forgets level. Bulleye face inward, always, because pebbles love breaking news. Campaign tents are where the palace proves it can fold. The Queen's pavilion rises like a held breath. Guy ropes staked along lines that will become hallways the moment the cloth stops snapping. Inside, rugs draw corridors. A painted lotus is stitched into a travel mat, and your toes remember not to trespass even when the tent flirts with the wind. Lamps hang in bronze cages, fire that can't wander at heights calculated for a seated reader, not a standing envoy, because a tent edits ambition. The scribe's table stands on wedges, so ink doesn't run downhill when the ground remembers it's a story. You angle cups toward the low side, just enough that a shy ripple takes a nap. You set a small household shrine near the tent's quiet wall, a portable Isis with eyes that forgive weather, and switch your tongue the way dawn switches light. Greek for logistics, Egyptian for rites, silence for everything that belongs to flame. A temple liaison recites the day's lucky hours. You adjust pacing, tuck the wax tablet into the repairer's pocket, bless them again, and move the audience mat half a handspan so gate lines meet omens halfway. A fact returns like a road, you know. Ptolemaic administration ran on calendars with lucky, unlucky hours braided through civic tasks, and armies marched with that watch in mind even when the ground argued. Guards become furniture with opinions plus dust. They build glass walls out of gaze and rope, and you learn to be a door the wind can't slam. The cipher tokens from Night Watch reappear faience more durable than rumour, and your fingers read notches by feel. Short, long means supply path clear. Long alone means send the repairers. A hinge remembered drama. The hinge will forget drama after a sigh of oil. Hinges have short memories if you speak their language. Travel makes cats into auditors. On boats they choose the warmest coil of rope and conduct mice diplomacy. On roads they sit on the one cloth you need. In tents they become ceiling inspectors, eyes tracking invisible opera. You make peace by pretending you planned for them. If one occupies the stitched lotus on the audience mat, you relocate sovereignty with the quiet cough you learned from door wardens and offer the cat a cushion with seniority. Light joke 3. You consider beading a clearance tab for the cat. The tailor files a requisition for morale. The debate you carry like a folded letter surfaces whenever the camp map comes out. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra rode with field columns regularly or kept closer to supply and signal points, whether the famous flagship at Actium in 31 BCE turned early to preserve the treasury or to trigger a retreat. You are not a general. You are a corridor wearing sandals. Your rule is simpler. Wherever authority breathes, you make space inhale quietly, whether it's a deck, a road, or a room made of cloth. Night on the march blends every lesson you've learned. You lower lamps to per height, set pest braziers at the door flaps, and fan with the slow ankle ballet that could put a wind god to sleep. The vow from earlier night is keeping travels with you. You log rumors without helping them walk. You lay out garments on cedar spaces inside a chest, so linen dreams flat even in a tent, and you hang the sash beads on a peg where the queen's shadow won't catch them. The measuring cord lies where you can find it in the dark by scent juniper is loyal, and you tuck a tiny mint sachet by the slit that likes to pretend it isn't a draft. Dawn finds you balancing a cup as the helmsman's finger rises, or steadying a scroll as a mule rethinks its worldview, or smoothing a mat so a lotus sits perfectly level on imperfect ground. All the callbacks travel soft knee walk on creaking planks, coal against glare-off water, beeswax rings, myrtle and mint sachets, repairers' pockets, the ochre river reborn as a rope line on deck. You become fluent in moving quiet. Place stops being a noun and becomes a verb you conjugate. I palace, you palace. This tent palaces. The queen steps into that verb and speaks, and the words travel as if the Nile itself volunteered to carry them. Pay in the palace is measured in more than coins. It's measured in distance from the queen, in how many doors breathe open, in whether the marble chooses not to squeak when you pass. Still, stipends matter. The steward ushers you into a room that smells like cedar shavings and fresh ink, payday's perfume, and sets a small bronze token on a tray, as if it were a moon on loan. Attendants are paid on ledgers you could fold into boats. Grain allowances logged in Greek, oil and linen allotments mirrored in Egyptian, and sometimes a little purse in coin that clinks like applause with good manners. Your name travels down the columns and lands next to numbers that convert to bread, lamp oil, and the right to sleep with a clear spine. A mainstream anchor settles at the edge of the tray. Ptolemaic Egypt ran on coinage and rations, silver tetradrachms for higher payments, plenty of bronze for daily business, and grain stipends that tied palace work to the Nile's generosity. Pay could arrive as barley and bread as easily as bronze, with ledgers keeping two languages honest. The steward taps your line with a reed pen, then a repairer's sigh. The reed needs trimming. The sigh fixes both. Promotions in this building are small stairs hidden in plain sight. First, you receive an extra bead, remember your blue-green tabs, that grants inner antechamber plus a duty on study thresholds. Next comes responsibility without trumpet. You train the new hands to keep cups calm and seals pointed at the right eyes. Then maybe a cord scented at both east and west juniper and myrtle, which means you're allowed to pace both directions of a corridor's pulse. Eventually, if your shoulders learn to make a room feel inevitable, the chamberlain trusts you with a queue-line chalk, so faint, only trained sandals obey, and you stage the air itself. Punishments are quieter than stories like to admit. Lashes exist? Yes. Counted into ledgers that prefer not to remember them. Fines step in where pride miscounted itself. Demotion tastes like stale oil outer corridors again. Longer hems because your steps are no longer allowed to be quick. The worst penalty is subtraction of trust. A room you once tuned pretends not to know your hands. You can see it in the way door wardens read the beads on your sash, with the politeness they reserve for strangers and cats they haven't yet interviewed. Light joke 1. A cat offers to take your case. The fee schedule is sauces and gossip. Rewards dress as ordinary favours. The chamberlain is not a confetti person. Instead, you get better thread in your mantle's hem, softer fall, quieter turns, or the tailor murmurs, "Try this," and gives you a sash whose tassels never try to date a scroll. The kitchen slips you a fig from the back of the bowl. The lamp team trims your wick before you ask. Once, after a flawless audience day when even the marble agreed to be humble, you find a tiny faience lotus bead on your bench. No note. You thread it inside the hem near your secret eye of Horus charm and feel your garments purr. There's a promotion you don't read on a ledger. Proximity. You're invited to assist at small readings in the study. A poem whispered over wine, a letter from the harbour opened with a raised eyebrow, a joke about the lighthouse doing its one-letter word all night. You are furniture with excellent timing. When it works, the Queen's words travel farther, for having used your quiet as a road. That is worth more than bronze that clinks. It's bronze that breathes. You learn the ritual of review, a soft audit the palace performs on itself. The steward calls it the cooling tally. Everyone who touched an audience day writes one clear line on a wax tablet. What went right? What went sideways? How a hinge learned to sing. You smooth errors with the stylus's blunt end. Remember that hush stick from language drills, then copy the final honest line to ostraca. The jar of these shards sits on a shelf above cedar spacers and dreams accountability into the linen. Quirky tidbit. Attendants joke that the shards argue at night. The successful chalkline shard telling the spilled date rescue shard to use fewer adjectives. The cat adjudicates, obviously. Historians still argue whether Ptolemaic palace service had formal ranks with fixed pay scales like later Roman systems, or whether favour and function braided tighter stipends flexing with season, sacrifice, and who could make a room hold its breath. Either way, you live the practical version. Do the job so well that cloth stops rustling, lamps stop performing, and sentences stop needing introductions. Your path upward is paved with tiny accuracies. You keep crossing painted lotuses only when allowed, never otherwise. You return seals to hands without making air a witness. You remember the no verbs that tug rule near thresholds and save rush for fire and water. The chamberlain notices you picking up a tray with the hand that keeps balance on a rocking deck, travel muscle memory, and doesn't comment, which is how this place says, yes, there's ceremony for bad days too. If you err, the palace doesn't make a festival of it. You go to the wardrobe court, hand over the bead that gave you an extra door, and receive undyed linen without stripes. The tailor nods once, which hurts more than a lecture. You work outer corridors, practice the Ochre River footwork again, and let boredom fix the angle of your breath. When you earn the bead back, the tailor gives it to your hands, not your pride. The bead feels heavier for a week. Then it learns to weigh just what it needs to. Payday returns. You sign for grain with a reed pen that finally agrees to be sharp, and the steward hands you a bronze token stamped with a lotus that looks like it knows secrets. You could cash it with the coin clerk, or trade it with the laundry court for an extra linen boil on travel weeks. You choose linen. Fresh cloth is a raise you can wear. Light joke too. The coin clerk offers to sweeten the deal with a lecture on tetradrachm portraits. You promise to attend the moment the lighthouse blinks twice in iambic pentameter. Perks appear in negative space. Your patrol token glows a different shade under lamplight sea green with a hint of dawn signalling that Night Watch trusts your hush without rehearsal. The physicians ask you to carry the antidote chest during a rehearsal drill. Steady hands count as currency. The guard captain stops calling you there, and starts calling you by the corridor name tied to your bead tabs. Runners begin timing themselves to your walk, which means your steps now set the corridor's metronome. Some rewards are ceremonies disguised as chores. You're assigned to teach the soft knee walk to 3 new men who still believe marble is just stone with ambitions. You walk the Ochre River you first followed, draw it with chalk, faint as breath, and listen to cups not chime. When their trays purr at the end, you feel a pay rise your purse won't show. Later, the repairers slip a better pin into your secret pocket, the one exactly 2 fingers wide, and don't say why. You know why. There is a single loud reward, but the palace whispers even that. One evening the chamberlain hands you a new sash, and the tassels have that reed pattern the tailor hides when he trusts somebody. Keep it neat, he says, which in this dialect means, don't change because of this. You don't. The sash sits where it belongs, and does not flirt with scrolls. The cat rubs its face on the fringe and claims partial credit. Punishments, when they must be public, are tidy. A man who bragged past a lotus line without invitation. The rod spoke, the ledger remembered, and the bead left his sash. He will earn it back by becoming predictable again. You bring him water that tastes like fresh patience, and practice thresholds with him in an empty hall. The palace prefers rehabilitation. It's cheaper than chaos. At month's end, the steward invites 3 of you to the roof to breathe the harbour's night. Pharos makes its slow revolution, writing that 1-letter word you never have to translate. The chamberlain says nothing for a long time. Then, rooms must be generous. You nod. Generosity is the raise the queen never has to sign. It is the coin that pays you back in sleep you didn't know you were owed. Light joke 3. The cat, who followed you up the stair like a rumour with paws, meows once. You log it as positive feedback. You descend, bead tabs winking, grain tallies sure, the secret eye of Horus stitching warm against your palm. The palace has paid you in bronze and in silence, in linen and in trust. Tomorrow you will spend all of it to buy the same thing back. A room where a voice can cross without raising itself, where a lotus line stays a promise, where a cup becomes a sentence and returns to being a cup. That is wealth here, the kind you carry without a clink. Feast days make the palace breathe in a different meter. Longer inhales, longer exits, a light that lingers at the edges as if reluctant to go home. Your orders arrive as a basket of time, a narrow slate of lucky hours chalked in stars and tiny fish, a string tied with knots that mark processional cues, and a whisper from the wardrobe court. Saffron at the hem, gold thread at the sash edge, nothing that sparkles louder than incense. Today belongs to rituals and appetites, and your job is to keep one from walking into the other. You begin with omens, because the calendar has opinions. The temple liaison touches the slate and reads the day's pulse in Egyptian. Then a secretary mirrors the essentials in Greek so logistics can salute. First note, no contracts before the second hour after sunrise. Bad star weather. Second, pourings to begin when the shade of the pylon kisses the third paving stone. Good luck for journeys. Third, songs in the inner court must avoid a certain refrain that has befriended the wind too enthusiastically. You mark your wax tablet, smooth a boastful adjective off the top, thank you, stylus hush stick, and tuck the tablet back into the repairer's pocket. Silence is the day's best lace. A mainstream anchor crosses the courtyard with the procession carts. The heliacal rising of Sirius Sopdet has long signalled Egypt's new year and the Nile's approach. The calendar in your hands is older than the marble under your sandals. The Ptolemaic court still leans into those rhythms, even as it adds Hellenistic sparkle Isis crowns beside Greek choruses, Nile hymns braided with civic spectacle. Cleopatra's public image likes the goddess's company, and festival dress follows suit. Linen cut to obey breeze and gravity, jewellery that whispers river and star. Feast prep begins in the kitchens, where heat thinks it is king. You help stage the first tables. Bread in shapes the gods recognize, hawks, eyes, lotus, jars of honey that catch light like good omens, bowls of dates that try to escape history by rolling. The high taster runs the safety drill, 2 taps for retreat the tray, and you answer with the choreography you learned the night poisons, pretended to be interesting. Reverse, angle, breathe, return the room to boring. Meanwhile, the perfumer walks through with a bowl of keefy smoke that curls like a librarian's smile. He lowers the flame until it purrs. You remember to keep lamps from performing. Light joke 1. A brazier tries for drama. You give it the eyebrow you reserve for envoys and wayward cats. Dress codes tilt toward joy but keep their math. Your sash wears that thin gold thread festival edge, not headline, and your bead tabs, blue-green, still too, wink like small patient stars. The door wardens rewrap their staffs with ceremonial linen. The green flow wrap becomes a spring leaf shade, the red paws a dignified pomegranate. Painted lotus lines remain sovereign. The stitched travel lotus mat waits in reserve, in case the procession route has to detour through rain. You review the routes with your measuring cord east. Still smells of juniper, a comfort that travels and tie chalk notches at corners where the air can get unruly. People follow chalk better than they think. Feasts require pacing with teeth. The kitchen staggers courses across courtyards like a polite tide. Salty, sweet, soothing. Wine that thinks it's a speech. Beer that remembers its bread with better jokes. You practice tray geometry so bread never kidnaps olives. And you seat fragile dishes near the beeswax ring where stability lives. A quirky tidbit from the fruit carver. If you score a pomegranate at the star points, you'll open it without a single mutiny from the seeds. He shows you, pride hidden under humility, and you log the trick in the same drawer where you keep the recipe for walking like weather. Omens grow teeth at thresholds. A swallow darts through the colonnade and everyone pretends not to be pleased. Good luck prefers modest audiences. If it perches on the lintel, double blessing, you move the gift table half a handspan so entrances line up with favour. If a plate breaks, plates have agendas on feast days, you do not say the word break. You say, the plate finished. Sweep with linen like a priest moving a cloud, and redistribute calm. Historians still argue whether the palace kept a fixed list of unlucky days from older calendars, or whether temple and court negotiated omens case by case. You live the negotiation stars, shade, and how the wind feels about songs. Procession time stretches the corridor into poetry. The queen appears with Isis in her posture, the sistrum's bronze tongue ready to speak. Lamps step down a fraction. Your pupils thank Cole for choosing medicine over fashion. You carry offerings at the shelf with a heart, angle palms up, fingers quiet, and you time your steps to the drum that remembers the river's syllables. Foreign envoys watch and calculate. Your job is to keep the calculation from becoming commentary. If a cloak's hem flirts with the lotus line, you arrive beside it with the gravity of excellent furniture, and the cloak rethinks ambition. If a cat sits in the middle of the feasting corridor, as if auditioning for the role of Crook of Plenty, you cough the door warden cough that relocates sovereignty without hurting feelings. Light joke 2. The cat declines relocation, offers a private audience to the fish course. Between rites, you check omens like a weather app that prefers papyrus. Shadow, stone, and breath keep time. The scribe tracks vows fulfilled and gifts given in both scripts. Greek for ledgers, Egyptian for offerings, because blessings, like orders, travel farther with two languages under them. A priest whispers that today's star hour favors reconciliations. The chamberlain silently reroutes two rivals to the same lamp, where light persuades eyebrows to agree. You note how easily geometry becomes diplomacy. Food arrives with its own etiquette. Garlic steps back from royal plates on festival mornings. Too loud, onions appear near the household tables, proud of their protective reputation. Fish takes turns with its river cousin, the Nile perch, and oils stand in tidy lines like small suns in jars. You angle cups so wine rises under the nose, just shy of boastful, and so beer remembers it is comfort, not a dare. The high taster tastes, the tray hums, the room continues to be inevitable. You drop a honey cake shaped like an ear near the household shrine. Offerings like that are rumoured to help prayers be heard, and you pretend not to notice the cat filing a request. Entertainment is regulated delight. Musicians tune to the room's temperature, not the other way around. You adjust shutters so sound doesn't make enemies with echo. Dancers learn the floor's dots. You chalk them under the rug, fringe to hit the mark that keeps light kind. When a singer's voice frays, you fetch the physician with the opal balsam the court swears is bottled sunrise. Your hands become a corridor for balm. The hymn returns, a thread caught and rewoven. You love your job most when it repairs without witnesses. Light joke 3. The repairers insist hinges sing in tune today. You consider adding them to the program. As the sun tilts, omens shift. The slate's last note says no important beginnings after the first evening star tonight is for finishing well. You stage the last service as a soft landing. Wine to memory, water to voice. A final plate of figs that taste like sentences closing properly. Curtains unclip to the rest height. Lamps lower to purr. The sistrum returns to its cradle. You count beads, cups, seals and breath, and discover you have a surplus of the last. The room is full and calm, something you can count even without numbers. Debates like cats return when nobody calls them. A secretary murmurs that historians still argue whether Cleopatra's feasts were calculated propaganda or genuine piety braided with statecraft. You shrug inwardly and polish a cup. In your ledger, the difference is a measure of volume, not sincerity. Soft feasts rule better. Rooms that rest hold words longer. After the last tray returns and the last omen waves you home, you stand a moment under the now ordinary ceiling and listen to the quiet congratulate itself. Your sandals find the soft knee walk without asking. The lotus line, unscuffed, looks pleased. You untie the knot that kept your measuring cord polite around your waist. Juniper breathes up like a friendly map. Somewhere, Pharos writes its one-letter word across the dark, and you realize that the whole day was a long, generous sentence with a wise period. You leave the gold thread sleeping where it can dream flat, log a single line in the shard jar, today finished, and let the palace return to its favorite perfume. Clean linen, small promises, and the kind of silence that tastes of bread cooling. Rules are easy when bread is plentiful and the sea behaves. They are harder when rumours blow in like a hot wind, and the grain ships are late enough to make even the lighthouse look nervous. You start the day with a ledger, a cord, and a vow to keep rooms calm when the city isn't. Alexandria lives on math, Nile flood, silo count, ration lines, and today the math frowns. The steward meets you at dawn with a tablet of adjustments. The ink still damp. Fewer loaves to the outer tables, more water at waiting points, extra door wardens where queues grow personalities. Your job is not to make bread. Your job is to ensure that air doesn't turn into kindling. Rumour arrives before breakfast. A dock runner whispers that 3 grain barges grounded on a sandbar that didn't exist yesterday. Sandbars are experimental like that. The nightjar of Ostraka remember the cooling tally already holds 2 shards about grain talk. You log the runner's words in Greek names. Hour. Tide mirror the essentials in Egyptian for temple liaison eyes, and then do the most important act. You don't repeat. Rumour eats attention. Don't feed it. Light joke 1. The cat offers to interview the sandbar. You deny press credentials on account of excessive smugness. Cues have choreography now. You stretch a cord juniper at the east, still faithful, and chalk faint dots where feet should stop so bodies become lines, not knots. Door wardens swap to green wraps for flow, and hold red wraps in reserve for the moment when flow forgets it's a guest. Water bearers hum the 2 heartbeat pour to keep cups moving. Torch bearers, even by day, stand with trimmed wicks because flame is a universal language for behave. You station smoke fans at ankle height, herding mosquitoes that arrive to unionize misery. The beeswax ring on the bread tray keeps loaves from slipping into theatre. A mainstream fact steadies your hands. Alexandria's grain mattered to everyone. Egypt fed itself and, increasingly, the wider Mediterranean. Later, Rome would rely heavily on Egyptian shipments. In Cleopatra's time, grain was already politics with crust. The palace knows it. Adjustments ripple from ledgers to doorways to your tray. Fewer honey cakes for display, more barley loaves for quiet hands. A second line of water that tastes like patience. You angle cups as if they were sentences ending well. Mid-morning brings a different pressure. Rome has eyes in the corridor. Not the whole Senate, just a tidy contingent of Roman officers with polite boots and faces that practice being the future. They watch everything, the way soldiers do when they're memorizing a building in case they have to return with louder verbs. You switch to Greek for the diplomat's ear, keep Egyptian for the shrine's breath, and let silence handle the intervals where pride would like to audition. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra leveraged grain promises in her dealings with Caesar and later Antony as blunt leverage, or kept domestic needs first and used diplomacy as garnish. Your ledger has no garnish column. It has loaves out and people calmer. Cues want stories. You give them actions instead. You split lines at lantern marks so each cue believes it's moving faster. You plant a door warden at the pivot point to be gravity, and you assign a runner to carry the rumour jar every 15 minutes. Fetch, read, calm. The runner brings back 1 ostracon, grain stolen from silos at Canopic Gate. The steward raises an eyebrow shaped like sauce. The runner admits, my cousin's neighbour's barber. You file it in the special category called air. Light joke 2. You consider inventing a new colour of staff wrap for barber-level intelligence. Decide the cats would veto. The Roman officers drift toward the gift table because wood looks honest and gifts look stable. You stage their path with the ochre dots you used to teach footwork. Remember the river line? So their boots walk the word reasonable. A secretary with good Latin gives them the tour of nothing. Lamps trimmed, ledgers in order, water flowing. You show them cups at the right height sternum, never glare, and they learn more from that quiet geometry than from a speech. They also learn the lotus rule by watching you stop exactly at the painted bloom. Left foot a whisper back. Rules under strain are still rules. The lotus is a promise you keep when ships don't. The audience chamber today is a weather station. Envoys come with lines about cooperation. Merchants come with eyebrows that mean price. You place each man at a lamp that forgives. Adjust interpreters so meanings land upright, and keep trays steady as diplomacy tries to wobble. When a merchant swells into first-person plural, we demand. You breathe stillness into the air until the plural turns into we hope. Light edits people. So do well-placed cups. The queen arrives composed, the sistrum resting. She is Isis without the thunder. She speaks in Greek. An Egyptian phrase slips in like a blessing. You see the Roman jawlines recalibrate. Language is a ledger too. Trouble kicks at the small doors. A runner reports a scuffle near the outer ration tables. Someone tried to jump the line. You take 3 things. A repaired tray, sturdy. A water jar, calm. And the door warden with the most diplomatic cough. You arrive, make the tray into a wall that isn't rude. Pour water at the everyone is included height. And let the cough place people back where chalk meant them to be. No shouting. Shouting is a lit match. Silence is a damp cloth. The queue relearns patience long enough for the steward to redistribute loaves like a magician who hates applause. quirky tidbit blooms in the heat. The linen court keeps a stash of shade cloths dyed with a marginally cooler hue. Something to do with how the eyes read blue that make waiting feel less like punishment. You string them between pillars. The air sighs. A Roman officer notices and murmurs a compliment that sounds like reconnaissance. You accept it like a cup you intend to put down. By afternoon, the city's talk has turned from bread to ships to the familiar opera called Rome. Someone claims a cohort will seize the harbour if grain disappears into private storage. Someone else claims the Queen will sail upriver tonight with coffers and a poet. You log, then move your feet. Moving feet beat moving mouths. You escort the physician to the ration lines with his honey and vinegar rinses. Crowds breed dry throats and short tempers, and you make the line itself into a lullaby. Step, paw, hand, step. The rod's copper tip taps time at the threshold. Not a threat, a metronome. A grounded fact returns with the smell of rope. During the Alexandrian War, 48-47 BCE, grain and ships became chess pieces, and later in the 32nds, the Mediterranean knew the names of Actium and Alexandria, the way you know the names of corridors. Your corridor knows this. Do today's math. Keep cups steady. Let speeches travel but not trample. Late day brings a test. An officer's aide asks with professional casualness how much grain remains in the southeastern silos. The wrong answer is a number. The right answer is a verb. You bow the smallest bow ants can see and say in Greek, cool as Kaifi. The steward audits at sunset. He waits, hoping your mouth will become a window. You become furniture with opinions and direct him to the secretary's whisper post. The secretary, whose job is windows, gives the answer wrapped in context and escort. The officer nods, impressed or deterred. Either way, the question has landed where it should. Light joke 3. You log the nod in the jar as weather improved. Evening at last. The rumour jar is heavier but calmer. The Q dots are scuffed in the good way. The lotus paint still smiles like patience. You pull curtains to rest height, lower lamps to purr, and let Kifi do its small domestic miracle of convincing air to remember libraries. The steward reads the final tally. Loaves issued, cups poured, incidents cooled. He underlines nothing. That is victory. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's grain policy during lean weeks was iron or velvet. Your hands argue for linen, the kind that holds shape because thousands of threads agreed. The Roman officers leave with their boots clean and their notebooks full of geometry they don't know how to describe. The door warden plants his staff in the angle that means finished, not closed, and the cat stretches across the chalk line like a signature. You straighten your bead tabs 2 blue-green glints that mean inner antechamber, and study threshold and feel their weight like a promise kept. The lighthouse writes its single patient syllable across the harbour. You answer with your favourite verb, you palace, quietly, so a voice can cross a room without raising itself, even when wheat debates destiny and Rome stares like a measuring rod. History keeps the palace, but only in pieces. Legend supplies the rest like an overeager repairer with a pocketful of poetry. You walk the corridor one last time, and feel how easily footprints become sources, sources become stories, and stories become furniture that future centuries sit on as if it had always been there. Later, ages will remember Cleopatra's voice as thunder, or as perfume, or as both on alternating Tuesdays. And your small rules will expand into emblems, the lotus line becoming law, the beeswax ring becoming diplomacy, the cat becoming a constitution. Memory edits with a soft cloth and a firm opinion. The mainstream marker settles first, polite as ever. Most of what the world says about Cleopatra later comes filtered through Roman pens, Octavian's propaganda, and then writers like Plutarch, Dio, and Strabo, who loved a stage and a moral more than they loved a corridor. They report languages and theatre, fleets and feasts, politics braided with ritual. They report too with agendas, your bead tabs blue-green. Patient do not appear in their paragraphs, which prefer purple sails to quiet wrists. Yet the floor remembers. The rules that made a room inevitable outlast the speech that used it. Archaeology adds its lantern to the water. Earthquakes and the sea taught the palace to sleep under waves. And divers in our own time find drowned courtyards, columns, and island outlines. Antihodos and the drowned quarter, like a city holding its breath. You imagine your painted lotus still smiling in a shade where fish read the news. Historians still argue whether the Queen's audience room stood entirely on Antihodos or straddled the mainland quay, and whether her tomb lies at Taposiris Magna or somewhere the river refused to confess. Debate is what scholarship does when a cat sits on the page and won't move. You leave the page open. The cat purrs. Legend gifts housekeeping to the queen. Recipes travel under her name, beauty and balm books in Greek, later Arabic, then Latin. Kaifi variations and skin salves wearing the signature Cleopatra like a seal. Quirky tidbit you can imagine a perfumer enjoying. A few medieval compendia attribute eye paint to her with an exactitude that smells like theatre, rosewater, soot, and meticulous measures. And though the chemistry is older than any one crown, the credit rides her fame like a barge with purple awnings. Meanwhile, your coal remains a lamp-taming habit, and your myrtle sachet keeps doing the humble work of smelling like competence. The rules you carried: walk soft, look near, speak like you're carrying porcelain, turn into stage direction for ages that keep restaging her. A playwright sees your door warden's cough and writes a trumpet. A painter sees your cup angle and paints a chalice that thinks in metaphors. A historian sees your beeswax ring and footnotes, tacit frictions, gently solved. The palace remains in the verbs, not the nouns. You palace the tent, you palace the barge, you palace the room so words can cross it without snapping. Memory sometimes misfiles. There will be milk bath myths that were really metaphors, as if softness were a policy and linen a foreign ministry. There will be asp endings with theatre blood and needle endings with theatre calm. And you will remember that the physicians taught you to carry antidotes without drama. A grounded fact returns with the steady tread of guards at changeover. Royal decrees in Ptolemaic Egypt appeared in parallel scripts, Greek and Egyptian, so decisions travelled more than one road at once. Long after you're gone, a stone dug from Rosetta will let later readers hear both roads again. Your wax tablet was practicing for that revelation every time your stylus smoothed a boast into a sentence that fit in a room. You rehearse your own afterlives and find they are small, generous things. The measuring cord a future attendant will inherit, faintly scented with juniper at the end that always knew which way was east. The reed pattern the tailor stitched along your mantle, a quiet signature of trust. The repairer's pin in the secret pocket, 2 fingers wide, now a relic with a job instead of a story. The cat you kept yielding to on the lotus will pass into palace folklore as her serenity of the thresholds, patron of dignified traffic jams. A door warden will teach a new hire the cough, and, without meaning to, teach him you. Outside the palace, the rules travel as hospitality. You will catch yourself decades from now, older, slower, softer, setting a cup at the right height on a table nobody sanded to mirror, and the friend across from you will feel unreasonably respected and not know why. You will stop at an invisible lotus line before entering a sick room. You will fold air for someone else's sentence. You will log a rumour by dropping your voice to the temperature that makes gossip forget its lines. The palace trained a kind of courtesy that outlives marble. People will keep asking enormous questions about Cleopatra, and rightly so: statecraft, survival. A woman who made empire share a stage with her breath, and your answers will remain tiny and faithful: lamps trimmed, hinges that don't sing at the wrong time, linen that dreams flat because cedar keeps watch, 3 languages that know when to nap. When they ask whether she was enchantress or administrator, you will think of the tray you held steady across the ochre river of chalk, and wonder if the difference matters to a cup that didn't spill. If the world wants to argue, let it. Historians still argue whether the famous meeting at Tarsus was diplomacy dressed as myth, or myth that did real political work. They still argue whether loyalty at Actium turned at the first wind shift or the first rumour. Rooms are not obligated to settle those points. Rooms offer evidence: how quiet made sentences longer, how light edited pride, how thresholds saved everyone from colliding with their own momentum. Your legacy is precisely that, making a place generous enough that truth could travel farther than performance. Now the last lantern lowers to a purr. You touch your bead tabs once, 2 glints of small authority rightly used, and lay the sash on cedar spaces so it dreams flat for someone else. The lotus smiles back from the floor as if dismissing you with affection. You return the repairer's pin to the pocket, slip the wax tablet in beside it, and let the sea wind write a soft, salt sentence down the corridor. Pharos blinks its 1-letter word across the harbour, and you answer by turning, finally, towards sleep. Let the palace fade to a breath, to a ribbon of lamplight that loosens and unwinds, to sandal prints that the marble decides not to remember. Let the lotus line turn from a rule into a soft border of shadow, a petal of quiet where your toes pause only long enough to feel how easy it is, now, to move without effort. The cats climb onto the last warm stone and become slow, regular breathing with whiskers. The curtains settle into their evening tremble. Somewhere, a hinge smiles, having nothing left to do. Your hands, which learned cups and scrolls and the exact angle of a listening wrist, grow lighter until they are only the idea of hands, then only warmth, then only the pleasant noticing that you won't drop anything because there is nothing to carry. The coal you wore for the lamps drifts away like a grey feather. The scent of kaifi thins to a kind of memory, raisin and resin, and library in the dark, then becomes the simplest noun, sleep. You can let the corridors lengthen and blur, like moonlight forgetting its edges on water. You can let the bead tabs on your sash reduce to 2 small stars, and then to 1, and then to none at all, because authority was always just calm in the correct shape, and calm is here now, everywhere, without stripes or chords. The lighthouse writes its single patient syllable across the harbour, slower each time, farther apart, until it feels like a heartbeat that has remembered how to rest. Breathe, shoulders down, jaw loose. The air is cool and correct. The room palaces itself, gently, around you, not a place to serve, but a place to be held. Rules become lullabies, and lullabies become a wide, soft sentence that does not need an ending. If thoughts knock, the door warden coughs, polite and final, and the thoughts agree to come back tomorrow. Sleep then. Let the lotus keep watch. Let the sea finish the story for you.